This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I haven't slept properly since that Easter Sunday in 2010. It's been 13 years, and I still wake up in cold sweats, thinking I'm back there, searching endless corridors of Eastern State Penitentiary. I was just a junior detective then, fresh out of training and eager to prove myself. Now I'm the one who can't let this case go. It started with what should have been a simple missing person report. Rebecca Winters, 42 years old, disappeared during an Easter sunrise service at Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. The historic prison-turned-museum hosts these events in the central rotunda, and everything was going normally until Rebecca went to retrieve her elderly mother's forgotten purse from one of the pews. I remember getting the call around 9 in the morning. Rebecca's mother, Sadie Chambers, was hysterical, repeating over and over, "She just went for my purse. Just for my purse." By the time I arrived, the prison staff had already done a preliminary search of the accessible areas. Nothing. What immediately struck me as odd was the security footage. Eastern State has cameras at all main entrances and exits. We could clearly see Rebecca on camera entering the rotunda from the east corridor at 7:45 a.m. She walked toward where her mother had been sitting, bent down near a pew, and then nothing. No footage of her leaving. None. She would have had to pass at least one camera to exit the rotunda, but she simply vanished. The museum director, a nervous man named Harris, kept insisting this was impossible. "Our security system was upgraded last year," he said, checking and rechecking the monitors. "There's no way someone could exit without being recorded. I interviewed everyone who attended the service. Most hadn't noticed anything, but 3 accounts stood out. An elderly man claimed he heard cell doors closing from the abandoned north wing during the quiet prayer moment. A teenage girl said she saw a dark figure standing in a corridor that was supposed to be off limits. But it was the choir member, Elena Vasquez, whose statement still gives me chills. "I was singing the final hymn when I heard it," she told me, her voice shaking. A whisper, right in my ear, like someone was standing right behind me. It said, "She's the one, Easter's bride, she'll do." I turned around, but no one was there. When I looked back, I saw Rebecca walking toward the pews. We expanded the search. Eastern State is massive, a Gothic fortress with 7 cell blocks radiating from a central hub like spokes on a wheel. Most of it is open to tourists, but there are sections deemed too dangerous or structurally unsound. We brought in dogs, thermal imaging equipment, everything. Nothing. The first 2 days yielded nothing but frustration. Rebecca's face was all over the news. Her mother Sadie stayed at the prison during daylight hours, clutching her daughter's photo, her eyes vacant with shock. She kept muttering, "It's happening again, it's happening again." When I asked her what she meant, she just shook her head and said she was confused. On the 3rd day, everything changed. A maintenance worker named Gus was checking a condemned section of cell block D when he noticed something odd about a brick wall that blocked off an old tunnel. The mortar looked different, he told me, pointing to a section near the floor. Fresher, like someone had recently disturbed it. We brought in structural engineers who confirmed his suspicion. Parts of the wall had been removed and replaced within the past few months. We got permission to break through, and behind it was a narrow passage that opened into a small chamber. I'll never forget what we found in that room. It wasn't on any blueprint or map of the prison. It contained a battery-powered lantern that was still working, bottles of water, a folding chair, and dozens of Polaroid photographs arranged in a cross pattern on the floor. The photos showed visitors to the prison, all taken without their knowledge. Men, women, children, all captured from hidden vantage points. And at the center of the cross was a photo of Rebecca entering the rotunda that Easter morning. The timestamp on the back read 6:22 a.m., more than an hour before the service began. On the chair was an old leather-bound book. The first entry was dated April 25, 1943, Easter Sunday that year. The handwriting changed every few entries, but the content described a ritual practiced by a secret group of guards and prisoners who called themselves the Redeemers. They believed that offering a pure soul during Easter sunrise would grant freedom to those trapped in purgatory, which they considered the prison to be. The entries continued sporadically until 1994. Each described the selection of a vessel, a visitor to the prison who showed certain qualities. The last entry simply read, "The cycle continues. 5 years until the next offering. The winter's bloodline must complete the circle." Behind a section of newer brickwork in the chamber, we discovered human remains. 7 individuals, all in various states of decomposition. Forensics later confirmed they matched missing persons who had disappeared between 1953 and 1994, all on or near Easter Sunday, with gaps of exactly 5 years between disappearances. I went back to interview Sadie Chambers again, this time with a different approach. "What do you know about the name Winters?" I asked her. Her face went pale. "That was my birth name," she whispered. "Before I was adopted. How did you know?" Our research team had been digging into the history of Eastern State and discovered that from 1934 to 1951, the Protestant chaplain at the prison was Reverend Isaiah Winters, Rebecca's great-grandfather. When I shared this information with Sadie, she insisted she had no knowledge of this connection, having been adopted as an infant in 1950. But then we found a photograph in the prison archives, Easter Sunday 1943, Reverend Winters standing in the central rotunda, and beside him a young girl who bore a striking resemblance to Sadie. When shown the photo, Sadie became agitated and insisted that was impossible, as she hadn't been born until 1950. "That's not me," she said, but her hands were shaking. "I don't know who that is." 1 week after being confronted with this photograph, Sadie Chambers disappeared from her assisted living facility. Her room was undisturbed except for an old iron key on her pillow. The facility's security cameras showed no one entering or leaving her room that night. The key was later identified as belonging to Eastern State Penitentiary's chaplain's office. Neither Sadie nor Rebecca has ever been found. I've spent years trying to piece it all together. The book we found mentioned secret passages constructed during the original building of the prison in the 1800s. Passages not on any blueprint, designed by a group of masons who believed the prison's radial design could serve as a spiritual conduit. According to the writings, these passages connected to a chamber beneath the central rotunda, where the offerings would be taken. Each Easter since Rebecca's disappearance, anonymous offerings of Easter lilies appear at the sealed entrance to the tunnel system. Despite increased security measures, including motion sensors and 24-hour camera surveillance, the flowers always appear between 3 and 4 a.m. on Easter morning. The security cameras malfunction with unusual regularity in that specific section of the prison, particularly around Easter. 3 years ago, I went back to Eastern State alone on Easter Eve. I stationed myself near the sealed tunnel entrance, determined to catch whoever was leaving the flowers. Around 3:15 a.m., the lights in the corridor flickered. My flashlight died. In the darkness, I heard footsteps approaching from behind me. Slow, deliberate steps. Then a whisper, right in my ear. "She's waiting for you. The cycle isn't complete." I spun around, gun drawn, but the corridor was empty. When I turned back, a single Easter lily lay at the base of the sealed wall, fresh, as if just cut. I've requested to be taken off active duty every Easter since Rebecca disappeared. I can't shake the feeling that I'm missing something crucial. The prison keeps calling me back. Sometimes when I walk through the rotunda, I swear I can hear Rebecca's voice echoing from somewhere deep within the walls, calling for help. The case remains officially open but inactive. My supervisors think I'm obsessed, and maybe I am. But the pattern is clear, every 5 years on Easter. This year marks the third 5-year cycle since Rebecca vanished. I've taken a week of vacation time, and I'll be back at Eastern State when Easter morning dawns. Because there's one detail I've never shared officially. In the 1943 photograph with Reverend Winters and the girl who looked like Sadie, there's a third person partially visible at the edge of the frame. A young officer, barely in his 20s. My grandfather. He worked as a guard at Eastern State from 1941 until 1952, when he abruptly quit and moved our family across the country. He never spoke about his time there. After he died, I found an old journal in his belongings with a single entry dated Easter 1943. What we did today cannot be undone. The winter's girl has been chosen. May God forgive us all. I don't know what happened in that prison 70 years ago or how it connects to Rebecca's disappearance, but I know that somewhere in those walls, behind brick and stone and secrets, are answers. And maybe, just maybe, Rebecca and Sadie. Sometimes at night, I dream I'm walking those corridors again. In my dreams, I find a door I've never seen before. Behind it, Rebecca is sitting in a circle of Easter lilies, her eyes vacant, whispering the same words over and over. The cycle continues. 5 years. The winter's bloodline. 5 years. I wake up sweating, checking the calendar. Easter is coming, and I can't shake the feeling that something is waiting for me at Eastern State, something that's been waiting for a very long time. Story 2. I've never told this story publicly before. It's been over 30 years, but I still wake up in cold sweats when the fog rolls in. I still unplug every electronic device in my house when I hear static on the phone. I still can't bring myself to live anywhere near a cell tower. I was 27 when it happened, working as a volunteer firefighter and running my dad's hardware store in Millfield, Pennsylvania. If you've never heard of it, I'm not surprised. It's been wiped off most maps now. Just another dead town in rural PA that couldn't keep up with the times. That's the official story anyway. Winter of 1990 was unusually mild at first. We'd had a beautiful fall, and everyone was saying we were due for an easy winter for once. Our little township, all 600 of us, was buzzing about the new cell tower being built on the ridge just past Old Miller Road. Sounds ridiculous now, but we were actually excited about it. No more driving 15 minutes to find a payphone when your car broke down. Progress, right? I remember the day they finished it, November 7th. There was this small ceremony with the mayor cutting a ribbon the whole 9 yards, the company guys in their pressed shirts talking about bringing Millfield into the future. Sheriff Donovan was there with that permanent frown of his, but even he seemed pleased. This was a big deal for a place like ours. That night I noticed my dog, Rex, was acting strange. He's normally this big goofball of a German shepherd who barks at everything. Squirrels, mailmen, his own shadow sometimes. But he just sat at the window staring toward the ridge, completely silent. When I tried to get him to come to bed, he growled at me. Not playfully, I mean really growled like I was a stranger. I didn't connect it to anything at the time, just thought he was having an off day. The next morning at the store, Mrs. Kellerman came in for some weather stripping and mentioned her cats were acting weird too. Then old Bill Jenkins said his hunting dogs wouldn't make a sound when a deer walked right through his yard. By the end of the week, it seemed like every animal in town had gone quiet. No barking, no howling, nothing. About 2 weeks after the tower went up, we started getting this fog. Not your normal morning mist that burns off by 10. This was thick, almost oily stuff that hung around certain areas of town. It would be perfectly clear at my place. Then I'd drive 2 blocks to the grocery store and hit a wall of white so dense you could barely see your hand in front of your face. Sheriff Donovan started keeping track of it. I know because he'd come into the store for coffee and we'd talk. He said the fog always seemed thickest around the same 7 or 8 properties. No pattern to them. Different parts of town, different types of houses. The only thing they had in common was a direct line of sight to the cell tower. That's when I first heard about the hum. People living in the foggy areas complained about this low electrical humming sound at night. Said it was like standing under power lines but inside their houses. The power company checked, but couldn't find anything wrong. I didn't hear it at my place, but I started having trouble sleeping anyway. Kept waking up with this weird metallic taste in my mouth, like I'd been sucking on pennies. My gums would bleed when I brushed my teeth. Figured it was stress. The store wasn't doing great, and I was working extra shifts at the fire station to make ends meet. Then came Thanksgiving weekend. The Pattersons called the sheriff's office about someone standing in their backyard. When deputies arrived, there was nobody there, but the grass where the person had been standing was flattened in a perfect circle, like something heavy had been pressing down on it. The Pattersons swore it wasn't a person exactly, more like a person-shaped shadow that didn't move, just stood there watching the house. 2 more families reported the same thing that weekend. Always after dark, always a motionless figure that vanished when they turned on the outside lights or went to investigate. I remember talking to Thomas Reeves about it at the store. Thomas was this retired electrical engineer who moved to Millfield to be closer to his daughter and grandkids. Smart guy, always reading scientific journals and tinkering with gadgets. He said he'd been taking electromagnetic readings around town ever since the animals started acting strange. "It's not right, Jake," he told me, tapping his little handheld meter. "These readings spike whenever the fog rolls in, and the pattern isn't random. It's repeating sequences like some kind of code." I asked him if he thought it was coming from the cell tower. He just gave me this look, like he was afraid to say yes, but couldn't say no. A week later, Thomas started keeping a journal. He'd show up at the store with his notebook full of times, locations, and readings. He mapped the fog patterns, tracked which houses reported the humming sound, even recorded the times when people saw the shadow figures. He was convinced it was all connected. The last time I saw him was December 16th. He came into the store looking terrible. Hadn't shaved, dark circles under his eyes. Said he hadn't slept in 3 days because the humming in his house had gotten so loud. "I've been getting phone calls too," he whispered, leaning across the counter. "Just static at first, but there's something in it. Voices, but not human ones. And they know my name, Jake." I tried to tell him to see a doctor, that maybe he was having auditory hallucinations from sleep deprivation. He grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises. "They're not just watching anymore," he said. "Last night I saw one inside my living room, standing in the corner. When I turned the light on, it was gone, but I could still feel it in the house." The next morning, Thomas's daughter called the sheriff in hysterics. She'd gone to check on him after he didn't answer his phone and found the house empty. His car was in the driveway, coffee still warm in the pot, but no sign of Thomas. The only strange things were some scorch marks on the kitchen floor and his measuring equipment, which looked like it had been melted. His journal was open on the table. The last entry just said, "They're not just watching anymore, they're coming inside." That's when people started getting scared. Really scared. Thomas wasn't the only one who disappeared. Over the next 3 weeks, 17 more people vanished. Same pattern every time. No signs of struggle, belongings left behind, those weird scorch marks somewhere in the house, and every single one had complained about the humming and had nosebleeds or that metallic taste before they disappeared. The phone calls started spreading too, more and more people getting calls from numbers that didn't exist, full of static and these sounds. I got one myself on January 2nd. I almost dropped the phone when I heard it, like someone running their fingers over a microphone mixed with what sounded like words being played backward. And underneath it all, my name, being repeated over and over. Sheriff Donovan finally got the FBI involved after the Millers vanished, all 4 of them, including their 2-year-old. They found the baby monitor was still on, recording nothing but static and what the technician described as non-human vocalizations. People started leaving town. Can't blame them. Those of us who stayed formed watch. Groups taking shifts to patrol neighborhoods. The town council voted to shut down the cell tower, but when the technicians went up there, they came back white as sheets. Said the equipment inside wasn't standard at all, had components they'd never seen before, and was broadcasting something that definitely wasn't cell phone signals. They tried to shut it down anyway, but nothing they did made any difference. The tower kept humming away, pumping out whatever signals it was sending. January 21st. I'll never forget that date. I was working late at the store, taking inventory when the fog rolled in. It was the thickest I'd ever seen it, but different somehow. It moved wrong. Not like fog should move. More purposeful, like it was searching for something. I locked up early and headed to the fire station where our watch group was meeting. Halfway there, my radio crackled to life. It was Sarah Miller, science teacher at the high school. She was practically screaming that the fog was filtering into her house through closed windows, moving against the airflow. Sheriff Donovan sent Deputy Collins to check on her. We all heard his transmission. I'm at the Miller residence. The fog is, Jesus Christ. There are lights in it, pulsing lights. I can see, then nothing but static. I floored it to the station. 6 of us grabbed gear and piled into 2 trucks, heading for Sarah's place. We never made it. The fog was so thick we couldn't see the road, and then the trucks just died. Electrical systems completely fried. That's when we heard the humming. Not just low anymore. It was vibrating in our chests, making my teeth ache. We abandoned the trucks and tried to continue on foot, but the fog, it was like walking through jello, and it was cold. Not normal cold, but the kind that burns. Then I saw them, shapes moving in the fog. Tall, thin silhouettes that seemed to flicker in and out of view. They weren't walking exactly, more like they were being pulled forward in stops and starts, like footage from an old film projector. Bill Jensen started screaming. He was only a few feet away from me, but I couldn't see him through the fog. Just heard him yell, "They're touching me! Oh God, they're..." Then silence. Complete silence. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran. Somehow I made it back to my house. Rex was going crazy, scratching at the door to get out, which made no sense. I locked everything, closed all the windows, stuffed towels under the doors, but the fog still seeped in. The hum was everywhere now. My phone, my radio, even the damn refrigerator, all giving off that same staticky noise, and voices in it, so many voices. I recognized some of them. Thomas, Mrs. Kellerman, Sheriff Donovan, all talking at once, saying things I couldn't understand, except for one phrase they kept repeating. "Join us in the quiet." The power went out. In the sudden darkness, I saw them. 3 tall shapes standing in my living room. The fog swirled around them, through them. They had no features I could make out, just darker patches where faces should be. I don't remember much after that. Just running out the back door, through woods I'd known my whole life but suddenly couldn't navigate. Branches whipping my face, that metallic taste flooding my mouth, blood pouring from my nose. I made it to the highway somehow, flagged down a trucker. The poor guy thought I was drunk or high, raving about fog and voices and people disappearing. He dropped me at a motel in the next county. When I called home the next morning, all I got was static. By the time the authorities took me seriously, it was too late. 43 more people had vanished overnight. The entire sheriff's office, the fire station crew, everyone left in the foggy areas. The remaining families fled immediately. The official investigation found nothing conclusive. The tower contained components that couldn't be identified. The scorch marks had weird chemical compositions. The recordings from the sheriff's office were full of voices speaking in unison with something else. I never went back to Millfield, couldn't bring myself to. From what I hear, it's a ghost town now. The cell tower still stands, though nobody maintains it. Nobody lives within 10 miles of it. Sometimes during storms, people in nearby towns report strange phone calls. Static at first, then voices. So many voices speaking as one, reciting coordinates of small towns with new cell towers. I've moved 6 times in 30 years. I don't own a cell phone. I check for fog every night before I sleep, because I know they're still out there in the quiet, waiting in the static, and they know my name. Story 3. I still wake up in cold sweats almost every night. It's been 3 months since our camping trip in Maplewood Forest, and I'm writing this down because I need someone to believe me. My therapist says I should journal about what happened, but this isn't for her. This is for anyone who might understand or who might be thinking about hiking in those woods. I grew up in Maplewood, a small town where everyone knows each other's business. As kids, we all heard the stories about the forest that surrounds our town, how the trees have eyes and the wind carries voices that will lead you astray. Parents would warn us not to wander too deep into the woods, especially not alone. The whispers of the woods, they called it. Just local folklore meant to keep kids from getting lost, or so I thought. By the time we hit our 20s, these childhood warnings had become something of a joke among my friend group. That's why when Ben suggested we go camping in the deepest part of Maplewood Forest during the long weekend in July, we all agreed it would be fun. There were 4 of us: Ben, Laura, Sam, and me, Rachel. We'd been friends since high school, and this was supposed to be our last adventure together before Sam moved across the country for his new job. We packed our gear on Friday morning: tents, sleeping bags, enough food for 3 days, and way too much alcohol. Laura, always the practical one, had researched a clearing about 5 miles into the forest that would be perfect for camping. Far enough to feel adventurous, but not so far that we couldn't hike back out if the weather turned bad. "You guys actually believe those stupid stories?" Laura laughed as we packed the cooler into Ben's truck. "My mom used to tell me the whispers would lure me away if I went past the old oak tree. I can't believe we were scared of this stuff." "It's just what parents say to keep their kids from wandering off and getting lost," Sam agreed. "Although my grandpa swears he heard them once when he was hunting, said they sounded like children playing." I remember laughing it off, but something about the way Sam's voice dropped when he mentioned his grandpa's story made the hair on my arms stand up. I pushed the feeling away. It was just a stupid legend. The hike to our campsite took longer than expected. The trail wasn't well maintained, and we had to stop several times to check Laura's map. By the time we reached the clearing, the sun was already starting to set, casting long shadows through the trees. The clearing itself was beautiful, a near-perfect circle surrounded by towering pines and maples. The ground was soft with fallen pine needles, and a small stream trickled nearby. We set up our tents quickly, gathering firewood before darkness fell completely. That first night around the campfire, we drank beer and roasted marshmallows, laughing about old memories and telling ghost stories. Ben, always trying to creep us out, brought up the whispers again. "They say the voices sound different to each person," he said, holding a flashlight under his chin for dramatic effect. "They mimic the voices of people you love, calling you deeper and deeper into the woods until you're completely lost." "Shut up, Ben." Laura threw a marshmallow at him. "You're not scaring anyone." But as the fire died down and the others crawled into their tents, I sat there looking into the darkness between the trees. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just silence. And then, just as I was about to head to my tent, I heard it. "Rachel." It was so faint I thought I'd imagined it, like someone whispering my name from very far away. I turned toward the sound, but there was nothing there, just darkness. "You guys hear that?" I called out, but only got grumbles from the tents. I tried to shake it off. It was just the wind, or my mind playing tricks after all those stories. I crawled into the tent I was sharing with Laura and zipped myself into my sleeping bag. It took me hours to fall asleep, and when I did, I dreamed of running through endless trees, following a voice I couldn't quite place. I woke up to Laura shaking my shoulder. "Rachel, wake up, someone's been through our stuff." I sat up, groggy and disoriented. "What?" "Our food is everywhere, the cooler's been knocked over." I followed her outside. Our campsite was a mess. The cooler lay on its side, food scattered across the ground. Our backpacks had been emptied, contents strewn about. "Bears?" Sam suggested, picking up a torn bag of chips. "There aren't supposed to be bears in this part of the forest," Laura said, consulting her guidebook. "And bears don't usually go through backpacks like this." "Maybe raccoons," Ben offered, but he didn't sound convinced. We spent the morning cleaning up and salvaging what food we could. Nothing was missing, just disorganized, like something had been looking for something specific, but didn't find it. "We should hike back," Laura said as we finished repacking. "This feels weird." I wanted to agree with her. The forest felt different in the daylight, oppressive somehow, the trees too close, the air too still. But Sam and Ben were already talking about exploring deeper, into the woods. "There's supposed to be some kind of old structure a couple miles from here," Ben said, pointing at Laura's map. "Probably just an old hunting cabin or something, but could be cool to check out." I didn't want to seem scared, so I nodded along. We decided to leave our campsite set up and take a day hike to find this structure. We packed water and some snacks into day packs and set off into the trees. The forest grew denser as we walked. The canopy above was so thick that only patches of sunlight made it through, creating an eerie, dappled effect on the forest floor. We'd been hiking for about an hour when I heard it again. "Rachel, come play with us." I stopped, dead in my tracks. "Did you guys hear that?" They all looked at me blankly. "Someone said my name," I insisted, like they were whispering it. "I didn't hear anything," Sam said, looking concerned. "It's just the wind in the trees," Laura said, but she glanced nervously at the dense forest around us. We kept walking, but now I was on edge, constantly listening for the voice. It came again about 20 minutes later, louder this time. "Rachel, we need you. Come find us." I spun around, sure it had come from right behind me. "There, you had to hear that." Ben looked worried now. "Rach, there's nothing there. Are you feeling okay? Maybe we should go back." "I'm not making this up," I snapped, frustration rising. "Someone is out there." "Let's just keep going," Sam suggested, clearly trying to diffuse the tension. "We're probably close to that structure by now." As we pushed forward, the whispers grew more frequent. They weren't just saying my name anymore. They were pleading, begging for help. The worst part was that I recognized the voices. One sounded exactly like my little brother, who died in a car accident when I was 15. Another sounded like my grandmother. People I'd loved and lost, calling to me from the trees. I didn't tell the others this. They already thought I was losing it, but I could feel the voices pulling me like hooks in my skin, tugging me in a specific direction. Without realizing it, I started leading our group, veering off the path we'd been following. "Rachel, where are you going?" Laura called, but I barely heard her over the chorus of whispers that now filled my head. "This way," I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. "We need to go this way." I pushed through a thick stand of brush, ignoring the scratches from branches, and then suddenly stopped. In front of us was a small clearing, and in its center stood what we'd been looking for. It wasn't a cabin. It was some kind of stone structure, a circle of rough-hewn stones about waist-high, with a larger stone table or altar in the center. The whole thing was covered in thick vines and moss, clearly ancient. Symbols were carved into the stones, worn by time but still visible. The whispers exploded into a cacophony the moment I saw it. "Help us! Find us! We're trapped! Rachel, please!" I stumbled forward, drawn to the stone circle like a magnet. The voices were coming from inside it or beneath it. I couldn't tell, but they were desperate now, pleading. "Rachel, wait!" Sam grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "Something's not right about this place." I tried to shake him off, but his grip was firm. "Don't you hear them?" I cried. "They need help." "There's nothing there," Laura said, her voice trembling. "Rachel, you're scaring us." Ben had approached the stone structure cautiously. These carvings, they looked like some kind of ancient language. I broke free from Sam's grip and rushed to the center of the circle, placing my hands on the altar stone. It was cold, unnaturally cold, like touching ice, but I couldn't pull away. The voices crescendoed, and suddenly I could see them, transparent figures swirling around me, their faces contorted in agony. "They're trapped," I whispered, understanding washing over me. "They've been trapped here for so long." "Rachel, get away from there," Laura screamed, but her voice sounded miles away. The stone beneath my palms began to vibrate, then glow with a faint, sickly green light. The carvings on it illuminated one by one, and I realized they formed a pattern, a spiral leading to the center where my hands rested. The figures around me became more solid, their whispers more distinct. I recognized faces now, not just my loved ones, but others. People in old-fashioned clothes. A man in what looked like a park ranger uniform. A young woman in hiking gear that could have been from the 1990s. They were all lost, all trapped, and they wanted me to join them. "Let go, Rachel." Sam was beside me now, trying to pull my hands away from the stone, but it was like they were glued there. The cold from the altar was creeping up my arms, numbing them. "They need a new voice," I heard myself say, the words not feeling like my own. A new voice to call others. Sam was shouting something, and then Ben was there too, both of them pulling at me while Laura screamed in the background. The figures swirled faster, their faces becoming angry, their whispers turning to howls of rage. Just as I felt my consciousness starting to fade, as if it were being pulled out of my body and into the stone, Sam did something desperate. He picked up a rock and smashed it against the altar where my hands were stuck. The stone cracked with a sound like thunder, and I was thrown backward, landing hard on the ground outside the circle. The glowing stopped instantly. The whispers cut off as if someone had flipped a switch. We didn't speak as we ran back toward our campsite. We didn't stop to rest or even look back. We just grabbed our essentials from the camp and continued running until we reached Ben's truck, leaving tents and most of our gear behind. No one believed us when we got back to town. The rangers we reported it to just nodded politely and said they'd look into it. When I went to the hospital for the strange burns on my palms, the doctor diagnosed it as an allergic reaction to some plant I must have touched. But I know what I experienced. Sometimes I still hear them at night, the whispers calling my name, begging me to come back, to help them, to join them. Laura and Ben don't talk to me much anymore. Sam checks in occasionally, but I can tell he's uncomfortable around me now. I've researched that stone circle extensively since then. From what I can piece together, it's some kind of ancient trap, a place where spirits or entities lure people in order to take their essence, their voice, to attract more victims. The people who disappear in those woods don't just get lost, they become part of the whispers. I don't know why I was able to escape when so many others weren't. Sometimes I wonder if I truly did escape, or if part of me is still there, trapped in that stone, calling out to others who venture too deep into Maplewood Forest. All I know is that I'll never set foot in those woods again. And if you're reading this and you live near Maplewood, or if you're just passing through, stay on the marked trails. And if you hear a voice calling your name from between the trees, no matter how familiar or desperate it sounds, don't follow it. Don't even acknowledge it. Just turn around and run. Story 4. I'm still struggling to sleep through the night, even though it's been 4 months since our road trip. I've tried therapy, meditation, even those herbal teas my mom swears by. Nothing helps. Every time I close my eyes, I see those shadows moving in the corners of that gas station. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night convinced I can hear scratching at my bedroom door. This all started back in May. After graduation, my friends and I decided to take that classic American road trip we'd been talking about since freshman year, Route 66 from Chicago to LA. There were 4 of us: me, my roommate Allison, her boyfriend Matt, and our friend Devin. We'd been planning it for months, saved up money from our part-time jobs, mapped out all the quirky roadside attractions, downloaded playlists. It was supposed to be our last hurrah before we scattered for jobs and grad school. The first 3 days were exactly what we'd hoped for. We took stupid pictures at the giant ketchup bottle in Illinois, ate our weight in barbecue in Missouri, posed with the blue whale in Oklahoma. We were living that carefree road trip dream, windows down, music blasting, not a care in the world beyond where we'd stop for lunch. Day 4 is when everything changed. We were somewhere in the Texas Panhandle, that stretch where the land is so flat you can practically see tomorrow. It was late afternoon, that golden hour when the sun makes everything look like it's been dipped in honey. We'd been driving for about 6 hours and were looking for a place to stop for the night when we hit the detour. There was just this orange sign in the middle of the road. Road closed, detour, with an arrow pointing down this narrow side road. Nothing unusual. Road construction happens. Devin was driving and followed the detour without thinking twice. None of us were paying much attention at first. Allison was napping, Matt was picking our next playlist, and I was trying to find a hotel in Amarillo for the night. The detour road wasn't on our GPS. That should have been our first warning sign, but we figured it was just some local road that hadn't been updated in the system. The pavement got rougher the further we drove, and the landscape changed. More scrubby trees, less open plain. After about 20 minutes, we realized we hadn't seen another car since turning off the main highway. "How long is this detour supposed to be?" Matt asked, and that's when we all started to feel uneasy. There hadn't been any signs since that first one, no indication of how to get back to Route 66. "Let me check Google Maps," I said, but my phone was showing that spinning wheel of death. No signal. Everyone else checked their phones too. Nothing. "Let's just keep going," Devin said. "We'll hit something eventually." Another 15 minutes passed and the sun was starting to set when we spotted it, an old gas station sitting all alone like something out of a different era. The sign just said gas in faded red letters, no brand name, no prices listed. The place looked like it hadn't been open in years, with weeds growing through cracks in the concrete, but there was a dim light visible through the grimy windows. "Should we stop and ask for directions?" Allison asked, fully awake now and clearly nervous. "I don't think anyone's there," Matt said, but Devin was already pulling in. "We need to figure out where we are," he said, "and I have to pee anyway." I remember feeling this cold knot in my stomach as we parked. The air was too still, like the world was holding its breath. But I told myself I was being dramatic. It was just an old gas station in the middle of nowhere, not exactly uncommon in rural Texas. We all got out of the car, stretching our legs. The place smelled musty, like old paper and dust. The door creaked when Devin pushed it open, and a little bell jingled overhead. Inside was like stepping back in time. Old-fashioned candy displays, faded beer advertisements on the walls, a rusted soda machine in the corner, but no one was behind the counter. "Hello?" Devin called out. No answer. While Devin went looking for a bathroom, the rest of us wandered around. That's when I noticed the bulletin board. It took up almost an entire wall next to the register, and it was covered, absolutely covered with newspaper clippings. At first, I thought it was just local news, but as I got closer, I realized every single article was about the same thing: missing persons. "Guys," I said, my voice coming out shakier than I expected. "Look at this." The articles spanned decades, from yellowed newspaper clippings from the 70s to what looked like printouts from online news sites from just a few months ago. All of them about people who had disappeared along this stretch of Route 66. Families on vacation, truckers, motorcyclists, college kids like us on road trips, all gone without a trace. What made it worse was that someone had drawn red lines connecting certain articles with little notes scribbled in the margins. "Same location," one said. "3 weeks apart," said another. Some had just question marks or exclamation points. "This is seriously creepy," Allison whispered, hugging herself. Matt tried to laugh it off. "Probably just some true crime buff who works here. People are obsessed with that stuff." But it didn't feel like someone's hobby project. It felt like research or a warning. That's when we heard it. A woman's voice, so faint I thought I was imagining it at first. "Help. Please. Is someone there? Help me." It was coming from the back of the store. We all froze, looking at each other. The voice came again, a little louder this time. "Please, I know someone's there. I can hear you." Matt called out for Devin, who appeared from around a shelf of dusty canned goods. "Did you guys hear that?" he asked. We nodded. I don't know why we didn't leave right then. Maybe it was because we thought someone was genuinely in trouble. Maybe it was just morbid curiosity. Whatever the reason, we followed the voice to a door marked "Staff Only" at the back of the store. Devin pushed it open slowly. Inside was a small storage room filled with cardboard boxes and old merchandise. And sitting on a folding chair in the corner was a woman. She was thin. No, not just thin, gaunt, like she hadn't eaten properly in weeks. Her clothes hung off her frame, and her hair was tangled and dull. But it was her eyes that really got to me, wide and alert and absolutely terrified. When she saw us, she stood up so quickly she knocked the chair over. "You need to leave," she said urgently. "Right now. They'll be back soon." "Who will?" Allison asked. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The woman shook her head frantically. "You don't understand. You can't be here when they come back. None of us can. When who comes back? Matt pressed. The people who work here? She laughed, but it was a hollow, desperate sound. Nothing human works here. Before any of us could respond, the lights flickered, once, twice, then steadied again. The woman's face drained of what little color it had. They're coming, she whispered. They always know when someone new arrives. That's when I saw it, a shadow moving in the corner of the room. Not like a normal shadow cast by one of us, but something darker, denser, moving independently. As I stared, it seemed to grow, stretching up the wall. Do you see that? I whispered to Devin, who had gone completely rigid beside me. We have to go, the woman said, her voice suddenly steady and commanding. Now, run to your car and don't stop for anything. Don't look back. The lights flickered again, and this time they went out completely for several seconds. When they came back on, there were shadows moving in every corner of the room. Go! The woman shouted, and we ran. We burst out of the storage room through the main part of the store and out the front door. I remember the bell jingling almost cheerfully as we fled. As we raced to the car, I couldn't help looking over my shoulder. The shadows were following us, not just in the store anymore, but sliding across the ground faster than seemed possible. And they weren't just shapeless blobs. They had form, vaguely humanoid but wrong somehow, like someone had tried to draw a person from memory and gotten the proportions all twisted. Devin fumbled with the keys, and those few seconds felt like an eternity. I could swear I felt something cold brush against my ankle as I stood there, waiting for the doors to unlock. Then we were in. Devin was starting the engine, and we were peeling out of that lot so fast we left rubber on the concrete. In the rearview mirror, I could see the gas station getting smaller and something dark moving in front of it. Several somethings, in fact, all gathered at the edge of the property like they couldn't go any further. The woman wasn't with them. She wasn't with us either. In our panic, we'd left her behind. No one spoke for at least 10 minutes as Devin drove like hell down that narrow road. Eventually, we hit a junction with actual road signs and managed to find our way back to Route 66. By then it was fully dark, and we were all trying to process what had just happened. What was that? Allison finally asked, her voice small. None of us had an answer. We drove until we found a motel, a proper chain one with other cars in the parking lot and a neon vacancy sign glowing reassuringly. We checked in, got a room with 2 queen beds, and tried to convince ourselves we'd just had some kind of mass hallucination brought on by road fatigue and an overly creepy location. But at 3 a.m, we all woke up to the sound of scratching at our door. Soft at first, then more insistent, and whispers. Barely audible, but definitely there. Help us. Devin turned on the light. We all stared at the door, watching in horror as the handle turned slowly, but the deadbolt and chain held. None of us slept after that. We sat up with all the lights on until dawn, not talking much, just waiting. When the sun finally came up, the scratching had stopped. At breakfast in the motel lobby, I picked up a local newspaper. On page 3 was a small article about another disappearance along Route 66, a family of 4 who'd gone missing 3 days earlier. Their car had been found abandoned near a closed section of the highway. We cut our trip short after that, headed straight back to Chicago. On the drive home, I used my phone to research that stretch of highway. It took some digging, but I found forum. Posts from other travelers who'd had similar experiences, detours that led to nowhere, abandoned gas stations that shouldn't exist, strange encounters with desperate people warning them away. And the shadows. Everyone mentioned the shadows, 4 months later, and I still can't explain what happened that day. I've tried to find that gas station on maps, but there's nothing there, just empty land for miles. I've looked up records of missing persons along Route 66, and there are so many more than there should be, stretching back decades. Sometimes I wonder about that woman. Did we leave her to something terrible? Was she even real, or was she part of whatever trap that place was setting? I don't know. All I know is that I still hear those whispers sometimes, right on the edge of sleep. Help us. And I wonder if someday I'll find myself back there, warning some other group of travelers to run while they still can. If you're planning a Route 66 road trip, take my advice. Stick to the main highway. If you see a detour sign, turn around and find another way. And if you ever find yourself at an abandoned gas station with newspaper clippings on the wall, don't go looking for the source of that voice calling for help, because whatever's casting those shadows might be waiting for you too. Story 5. I've been a truck driver for almost 20 years now, hauling loads across the lower 48, and I've seen plenty of weird stuff on the road. When you spend most of your life on highways, you develop a sixth sense for danger, but nothing prepared me for what happened at Blue Mesa last year. I was Ray Wilson, the guy John Lawson called before he vanished. We weren't best friends or anything, but we'd shared enough coffees at truck stops over the years to have a decent rapport. Both of us drove for Southern Cross Logistics, though we rarely crossed paths on our routes. That night, May 17th, 2011, started like any other. I was parked at a rest area in Missouri trying to catch some sleep before continuing my haul to Chicago. Around 11:30 at night, my phone rang. It was John. "Ray, you ever heard those stories about the highway people?" His voice sounded strange, tight with tension. I rubbed my eyes, annoyed at being woken up. "What? Like hitchhiker ghosts?" No, the ones my grandpa used to talk about. The things that pretend to be human but aren't. The ones that hunt truckers." I remember sighing, thinking John was just bored and wanting to swap ghost stories. "Yeah, every trucker's got some version of that tale." "Why?" There was a pause, and I heard him breathing heavily. "I think I'm looking at one right now. They're real, Ray." Something in his voice made the hair on my arms stand up. John wasn't the type to get spooked easily. He'd driven through blizzards, tornadoes, you name it. "Where are you?" I asked, sitting up straight in my bunk. "Blue Mesa, Oklahoma." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "There's something not right here. Been feeling it since I pulled in. Now I see it." "See what exactly?" I was fully awake now. "It's just standing there, between the trucks, looking up at windows. Its face isn't... It's not right, Ray." I heard what sounded like his door unlocking. "John, what are you doing? Stay in your cab." "I need to see. It's gone around back now toward the woods. There's these weird lights back there too." "John, listen to me. Lock your doors and wait till morning." The line went quiet for a moment. Then I heard him mutter, "Holy shit," before the call cut off. I tried calling back immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. I didn't think much of it at the time. Service at truck stops can be spotty. I figured he'd call back or I'd hear from him the next day, but I never did. When I heard about his disappearance 2 days later, my blood ran cold. I immediately called the police and told them about our conversation, but I could tell they thought it was just trucker superstition. They focused on more logical explanations, that John had staged his disappearance or met with foul play from another person. After giving my statement, I tried to move on, but I couldn't shake the memory of that call. The fear in John's voice was real. About 3 weeks after it happened, I had to take a route that would pass by Blue Mesa. I told myself I was being stupid, but I decided to stop there. I needed to see the place for myself. Blue Mesa Truck Plaza isn't anything special, just another stop along the highway with diesel pumps, a convenience store, a small diner, and a lot for overnight parking. But the moment I pulled in, I felt wrong, like I was being watched from every angle. I parked and went inside, casually asking the cashier about what happened to that driver who disappeared. The young guy behind the counter immediately tensed up. "We don't talk about that much," he said, glancing toward his manager's office. "Bad for business." I pressed a bit, mentioning I knew John. The cashier leaned forward and lowered his voice. "Look, I wasn't working that night, but Bill, the manager, he found the truck, said everything was normal inside, like the guy just stepped out for a minute and never came back, but..." He hesitated. "But what?" "But Bill's different now. Jumpy, won't take the trash out after dark, and he refuses to discuss what he saw on the security tapes." I thanked him and bought a coffee. As I was leaving, a heavy-set man with a weary face emerged from the back office. I assumed it was Bill Haskell, the manager. Our eyes met briefly and I saw something there, a haunted look that made me quickly turn away. Outside, I walked around the perimeter of the lot, ending up at the tree line behind the plaza. The woods weren't particularly dense, just a stretch of scrubby Oklahoma forest. But standing there, looking in, I felt a visceral reluctance to step any closer. That's when I noticed an older trucker watching me from beside his rig. He was smoking a cigarette, his face deeply lined, eyes narrowed against the smoke. "You looking for something specific back there?" he called out. I walked over and introduced myself, explaining I was a friend of John Lawson's. The man nodded slowly. "Paul Davenport," he said, extending a weathered hand. "I was here that night." My heart skipped a beat. "You saw something?" Paul took a long drag of his cigarette before answering. "I saw a figure standing between my truck and Lawson's, just standing there staring up at his window. Thought it was strange, someone just standing in the rain like that." "It was raining?" I hadn't known this detail. "Drizzling, not heavy, that's why—" He paused, swallowing hard. "That's why I noticed its face looked so wet, too wet, like it was covered in something slick." A chill ran down my spine despite the warm day. "What did you do?" I grabbed my flashlight and shined it out my window, and it turned and looked at me. He dropped his cigarette and crushed it under his boot. Its eyes caught the light, reflected it back like a damn deer or something, and its face, no features I could make out clearly, just this smooth, wet-looking thing. Paul fell silent, staring at the ground. "Then what happened?" I prompted. "It just walked away, toward the woods." A few minutes later, I saw Lawson leave his truck and head in the same direction. Paul looked up at me, his expression grave. I should have stopped him, should have called out or something. But I was scared, if I'm being honest. Next morning, his truck was still there, but he wasn't. I thanked Paul for talking to me and went back to my truck. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, staring at the tree line. As the sun started to set, I noticed other drivers moving their rigs, repositioning to the front part of the lot, away from the woods. I decided to stay the night. I know, stupid decision, but I felt like I owed it to John to try to understand what happened. I parked in almost the same spot his truck had been, according to what Paul had told me. As darkness fell, I couldn't help but notice how quiet it got. Most truck stops have a constant hum of idling engines, but not here. It seemed like every driver was shutting down completely, as if conserving power. Around midnight, I was still awake, unable to sleep. That's when I noticed the lights, faint pulses of bluish-white light coming from deep in the woods. They didn't move like flashlights, more like slow, rhythmic pulses, like something breathing. I remembered what John had said about lights in the woods. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to keep watching. The lights continued for about 10 minutes, then stopped abruptly. That's when I heard it, a sound I still can't properly describe, like metal being torn, but with an organic quality to it. A ripping, tearing sound that seemed to echo across the lot, and immediately after, every dog in the vehicles around me started howling, not barking, howling like wolves. I nearly jumped out of my skin when someone knocked on my door. I looked out to see a middle-aged Latina woman standing there, her face pale with fear. I cracked the window. "You hear that?" she asked without preamble. I nodded. "I was here that night too," she said. "I'm Maria. I heard the same sound right before that driver disappeared." We talked for a while, both of us too unsettled to sleep. Maria told me she'd seen John walking toward the woods, moving with purpose, like he was following something. "The weird thing was," she said, "he didn't look scared. He looked curious, like he needed to understand something." Around 3 in the morning, we both finally tried to get some sleep. I locked my doors, kept my keys in the ignition, ready to drive off if needed. I must have dozed off eventually because the next thing I knew, it was dawn. As I was preparing to leave, I noticed something odd about my truck. The side mirror on the passenger side was turned, angled differently than I'd left it, and there was a smudge on the window, a handprint, but wrong somehow. The fingers were too long, the palm too narrow. I left Blue Mesa that morning and swore I'd never go back, but the story doesn't end there. 8 months later, I got a call from the police. They'd found John's cap in a tree behind the plaza. They wanted to know if I could identify it. I drove down to the station, and sure enough, it was his, a distinctive Southern Cross Logistics cap with a fraying bill that John had refused to replace despite getting a new one every year. The officer showed me photos of where they found it. The cap was wedged in a fork of a tree, a good 15 feet off the ground. No weather damage despite being exposed for months, but the most disturbing part was the inside band. Deep scratch marks like fingernails had dug into it as it was ripped off his head. I asked if I could keep the cap, but they said it was evidence. Evidence of what? They couldn't say. John's case remained open but inactive. No body, no suspects, no explanation. Since then, I've heard Southern Cross sold John's truck. The new driver lasted 2 weeks before requesting a different vehicle. Claimed the electrical system kept malfunctioning, lights flickering, radio turning on by itself. Said there were cold spots in the cab no matter how high he turned the heat. I've changed my routes to avoid Oklahoma entirely. Can't bring myself to drive those highways anymore. Some nights when I'm parked at a quiet stop, I still hear that tearing sound in my dreams. I wake up sweating, certain something is watching me from between the trucks. I don't know what happened to John Lawson, but I know he saw something at Blue Mesa, something his grandfather had warned him about, something that hunts on the highways. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, watching for drivers who are alone, tired, vulnerable, waiting for someone else to notice it, standing in the darkness, looking up at their window. And sometimes when I'm driving at night and see weird lights in my rearview mirror, I hear John's last words to me. They're real, Ray, and I drive a little faster, keep my doors locked, and don't stop until I reach somewhere bright and crowded with people. Because out on those empty stretches of highway, in the spaces between towns where the darkness is absolute, I can't shake the feeling that the highway people are watching, waiting for another trucker to get curious about what's hiding in the woods. Story 6. I never thought I'd be the person to abandon a dream home, but here we are. My husband Mark and I found this unbelievable deal on a lakefront property in Vermont back in 2011. We both grew up in cramped apartments in Boston and always fantasized about having our own place on the water. When we saw the listing for the Cedar House on Lake Champlain, it felt like the universe was finally giving us our break. The place was gorgeous, 3 bedrooms, a massive kitchen with granite countertops, and these floor-to-ceiling windows that gave you this incredible panoramic view of the lake. We couldn't believe the price. It was like 40% below market value, which should have been our first warning sign. But you know how it is when you want something badly enough. You ignore the red flags. The real estate agent, this woman named Diane, seemed nervous when we asked why the price was so low. She kept avoiding eye contact and shuffling papers around until Mark pressed her. Finally, she admitted that the house had changed hands 3 times in the past 5 years. People just seem to move on quickly, she said with this weird little laugh. But that's your opportunity, right? Mark and I looked at each other and silently agreed. We weren't going to let other people's superstitions rob us of our dream house. We were rational people. We worked in tech, for God's sake. So we signed the papers and Blackwater Cove became ours. The first few weeks were absolutely perfect. We'd wake up to the sound of water lapping against the shore, have coffee on the deck, work from our home offices, and swim in the evenings. I remember telling Mark this was the happiest I'd ever been. I actually said those exact words. Everything changed in August. We were about 6 weeks into living there when this massive thunderstorm hit. The kind where the rain comes down in sheets and the wind makes the whole house creak. I couldn't sleep, so I went downstairs to make some tea and just watch the storm from our living room windows. That's when I saw it. a figure standing on our dock. At first, I thought it was just a shadow or my eyes playing tricks on me. But then, lightning flashed, and I saw them clearly. Someone in dark, soaked clothing, just standing there, completely motionless, in the middle of a violent storm, just watching our house. I freaked out and ran to wake up Mark. By the time we both got back downstairs with a flashlight, whoever it was had vanished. Mark thought I was seeing things, but I know what I saw. The next morning, we found wet footprints leading from the dock up to our porch. They were small, like a child's. We called the sheriff, a guy named Denton Hargrove who looked like he'd been policing these shores forever. When he arrived and we told him what happened, he didn't seem surprised at all. That's what really got to me. He just nodded and looked out at the cove. "Blackwater gets its name honestly," he said cryptically. When I asked what he meant, he just shrugged. "Water's darker here than other parts of the lake. Currents are unusual too. Things get caught in Blackwater that don't get caught elsewhere." He suggested we install security cameras, which we did immediately. 4 cameras, one pointing at the dock, one at the back deck, one at the front door, and one covering the side of the property. We thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. For a few weeks, nothing happened. Then, on September 17th, I remember the date because it was my mom's birthday. All 4 cameras simultaneously lost power between 2:15 and 4:30 in the morning. The system logged it as a power failure, but nothing else in the house was affected. Just the cameras. The next morning, Mark found small, wet footprints leading from the dock across our back deck toward our bedroom's sliding glass door. The weird thing was, they just disappeared halfway across, like whoever made them had suddenly vanished or been lifted up. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. That's when I started researching the property's history. The local library had newspaper archives and property records going back decades. Turns out, Blackwater Cove had been completely undeveloped until 2006 when some guy named Richard Mercer built our house. He sold it just 8 months later. The second owners were the Landry family, Mom, Dad, and a little girl about 8 years old. They lasted almost a year before moving out abruptly. I found an interview with Mrs. Landry in the local paper where she mentioned her daughter had developed an unhealthy attachment to the lake and talked constantly about an imaginary friend, a soaking wet boy who visited her bedroom window at night. But the most disturbing thing I found was from 1998, years before our house was even built. There was a boating accident in Blackwater Cove involving a father and son, Timothy and Andrew Whelan. Their boat capsized during a sudden squall. Timothy's body was recovered the next day, but 9-year-old Andrew was never found. The article mentioned that before Timothy died at the hospital, he kept muttering something that gave me chills when I read it. "He won't let go. At the bottom, he won't let go." When I showed all this to Mark, he got really quiet. He'd been the skeptical one, but even he couldn't dismiss everything that was happening. That night, we both had trouble sleeping. Around 3 in the morning, we heard it. The sound of fingernails dragging across our bedroom window, accompanied by the drip, drip, drip of water. Our bedroom was on the 2nd floor. The security cameras started malfunctioning regularly. Sometimes they'd go out completely. Other times they'd capture these weird audio distortions. One night, we were reviewing the footage and heard what sounded like a child's voice whispering, "He's here with me now." It was so clear, so distinct. We both looked at each other and knew we couldn't stay there another night. We packed essential items and drove to a hotel in Burlington. The next morning, Mark went back to get more of our stuff while I stayed behind. He called me an hour later, sounding shaken. He said when he arrived, all the faucets in the house were running and there were puddles of lake water throughout the house, even though all the doors and windows were locked. I was done. I told Mark we needed to sell the house immediately. He agreed, but we were worried nobody would buy it if they knew what was happening. We decided to leave a digital voice recorder in the house overnight to see if we could capture anything that might help us understand what was going on. Maybe it was all explainable. Weird acoustics, a neighborhood kid playing pranks, something rational. The next day, we retrieved the recorder and listened to it in our hotel room. For hours, there was nothing but the normal sounds of an empty house. Then around 3:15 in the morning, we heard it. A child's voice, clear as day. "When are they coming back? I'm cold." And then, most terrifying of all, an adult male voice responding, "Soon. I told you they always come back." We put the house on the market that same day, sold it at a significant loss to a couple from New York who thought they were getting the deal of a lifetime. I sometimes think about them and wonder if they're still there or if they've already joined the growing list of former Blackwater Cove residents. Before we moved to Arizona, as far from large bodies of water as we could get, I contacted a limnologist who studied Lake Champlain. I asked her about Blackwater Cove specifically. She told me they'd done a hydrological survey of the area a few years back and found unusual depths and impossible current patterns in that particular section of the lake. She described it as a perpetual underwater holding pattern where nothing fully surfaces or gets carried away. "Whatever sinks in Blackwater Cove," she told me, "stays in Blackwater Cove." I've tried to move on with my life. Mark and I rarely talk about what happened. We've made a silent agreement to pretend it was all just stress and an old house playing tricks on us. But sometimes, when it rains heavily at night, I still hear that tapping on the window. And sometimes I dream of a little boy, soaking wet, standing at the foot of my bed. Behind him stands a tall figure, a man, equally drenched, with a hand gripping the boy's shoulder so tightly his knuckles are white. In my dreams, the boy always says the same thing. He won't let me go. He says no one leaves Blackwater. I wake up with my sheets soaked, as if I've been dragged through the lake myself. Mark says I sleepwalk on those nights, that I've been finding me standing in front of our windows, my fingers pressed against the glass. I looked up records for Blackwater Cove recently. The property has changed hands twice more since we left. A company did some underwater exploration of the cove last year as part of an environmental study. The divers reported unusual underwater topography, a sort of bowl-shaped depression that creates swirling currents that trap debris at the bottom. They also reported something else, something that didn't make it into their official findings, but that one of the divers told me when I reached out. He said they found a child's shoe preserved in the muck at the bottom of the cove. When they tried to retrieve it, their equipment malfunctioned, and one of the divers experienced an emergency that forced them to surface. He swore that as they ascended, he looked back down and saw two figures in the murky water below, one large and one small, looking up at them. I don't know what happened to Andrew Whelan in 1998. I don't know who or what his father was referring to when he said he won't let go, but I know that whatever is in Blackwater Cove isn't alone, and it doesn't want to be. It wants company. And sometimes, on the darkest nights, I'm terrified it followed us to Arizona. Last week our pipes burst unexpectedly. The plumber couldn't explain it. As the water pooled on our kitchen floor, I swear I saw small footprints forming, appearing and disappearing as if someone invisible was walking through the water. And just for a moment I caught a whiff of lake water, that distinctive smell of Blackwater Cove. I haven't told Mark. I don't know what to do. I don't know if we can ever truly leave that place behind. Story 7. I still can't explain what happened that night in February last year, and I'm not sure I want to. I've always considered myself practical, logical, the type of person who finds rational explanations for everything. But what happened on Route 44 in the Berkshires? I've got nothing. It was February 17th, 2018. The date is burned into my memory now. I'm a pharmaceutical sales rep covering the New England territory, and I was driving back from a conference in Albany to my apartment in Boston. The weather forecast had mentioned possible snow, but nothing major. I figured I'd beat the worst of it. By the time I hit the Berkshire Mountains, I knew I'd made a mistake. The snow was coming down hard, those big, heavy flakes. That pile up fast. My wipers were struggling to keep up, and visibility was getting worse by the minute. I had my high beams on, but they just reflected off the wall of white ahead of me. I slowed down to maybe 30 miles per hour, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. Route 44 isn't exactly a major highway in that area. It's winding, dark, with these tall pines crowding in on both sides. Cell reception is spotty at best. I remember thinking if I got stuck out here, I'd be in real trouble. I was near Hawley, this tiny town with maybe 300 people, when I saw her. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. A figure at the side of the road, just standing there in the snow. As I got closer, my headlights illuminated her clearly. A young woman in a thin white dress, no coat, no hat, nothing you'd expect someone to be wearing in a snowstorm. She had her arm out, thumb up, hitchhiking. My mom always drilled into me, never pick up hitchhikers. It's basically rule number 1 of driving alone as a woman. But it was below freezing, snowing hard, and this girl was wearing practically nothing. I couldn't just drive past and leave her to freeze to death. I pulled over about 20 feet ahead of her and watched in my rearview mirror as she walked toward my car. There was something off about the way she moved, not quite stumbling, but not quite natural either. She didn't seem to be hunching against the cold or rushing to get out of the snow. She just walked. When she opened the passenger door, I was hit with a blast of cold air, but nothing else. No stomping of snowy boots, no shivering, no thank God you stopped. "Hi," I said, turning down my podcast. "Where are you headed?" "Petersham," she replied, her voice soft but clear. "If you're going that way." I was. Petersham was about 40 minutes east, right on my route back to Boston. "I'm Sarah," I told her, pulling back onto the road carefully. "Catherine," she said. "Catherine Mills." I cranked up the heat even more. "You must be freezing. What happened? Car breakdown?" She smoothed her dress over her knees. It was an old-fashioned style, like something from the 80s. Her hair was done in that way too, kind of feathered. "My fiancé and I had a fight," she said. "He made me get out of the car." "Jesus," I said. "In this weather, with no coat." I glanced over at her. Her skin was so pale, almost bluish, but she wasn't shivering, not even a little. "Do you want to use my phone to call someone?" She shook her head. "No, there's no one to call." I should have found that strange, but I was focused on the road. The snow was getting worse, building up on the windshield faster than my wipers could clear it. "So you live in Petersham?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "Yes," she said, "with my mother. I was visiting James, my fiancé, in Albany. We were supposed to set a date for the wedding." Something about the way she said it made my skin prickle. Past tense. "We're supposed to." "I'm sorry about the fight," I said. "He doesn't understand," she replied, staring straight ahead. "He thinks I'm being difficult, but I just want everything to be perfect." We drove in silence for a while. I kept sneaking glances at her. She hadn't buckled her seatbelt, and she wasn't touching anything in the car. Not the door handle, not the seat, nothing. Her hands were folded in her lap, perfectly still. And despite sitting next to the heater vent, there was no color returning to her cheeks. About 20 minutes in, we approached a crossroads. It wasn't much, just a rural intersection with a single blinking yellow light swaying in the wind. Catherine suddenly became agitated. "Slow down," she said sharply. I tapped the brakes, thinking maybe she'd spotted an animal or another car. "This is where it happened," she whispered. "Where what happened?" She turned to look at me fully for the first time. Her eyes were wrong somehow, too bright, too fixed. "Where James died," she said. 30 years ago today, February 17th, 1988. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran through me. I slowed the car almost to a stop, right in the middle of the intersection. "What are you talking about?" "He was driving too fast in the snow," she continued, her voice distant. "He lost control right here. The car flipped 3 times. They said he died instantly." I was struggling to process what she was saying. 30 years ago. That would make her, in her 50s? But the woman beside me couldn't have been older than 25. "Catherine, I don't..." I glanced over at the passenger seat and my heart nearly stopped. The seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes, skidding slightly on the snow. My car came to a stop right in the middle of the intersection. I whipped around, checking the back seat. Empty. I even leaned over to look at the floor of the passenger side. Nothing. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the steering wheel. I turned on all the interior lights and just sat there, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what had just happened. There was no way someone could have jumped out of my car. We were moving. The doors were closed. I would have heard something, felt the rush of cold air. But Catherine was gone, like she'd never been there at all. I eventually managed to get myself together enough to keep driving. The nearest town with a motel was still 20 minutes away, and I couldn't spend the night in my car in a blizzard. I drove well below the speed limit, jumping at every shadow, constantly checking my rearview mirror and the empty passenger seat. I barely slept that night in the motel. I kept replaying everything in my mind, trying to find some rational explanation. Maybe I'd been more tired than I thought. Maybe I'd hallucinated the whole thing. Stress, exhaustion, the hypnotic effect of the snow. There had to be some explanation, but one thing kept nagging at me: the date. February 17th, 1988. It was too specific to be random. The next morning, instead of heading straight back to Boston, I drove to the Petersham Public Library. It was a small place, warm and quiet. I approached the librarian, a woman in her 60s with silver-rimmed glasses, and asked if they kept local newspaper archives. "We do," she said. "Anything in particular you're looking for?" I hesitated, feeling ridiculous. I'm interested in any accidents that might have happened around here in February 1988. If she thought it was a strange request, she didn't show it. She led me to a computer and showed me how to search their digitized archives. It took less than 5 minutes to find it. Local man killed in crash. Fiancé critical. February 18th, 1988. The article described how James Hoffman, 26, lost control of his vehicle during a snowstorm at the intersection of Route 44 and Mill Road. He was pronounced dead at the scene. His passenger and fiancée, Catherine Mills, 23, was critically injured and rushed to Bay State Medical Center in Springfield. My hands were trembling as I clicked to the next day's paper, and the next. 3 days after the accident, there it was. Second victim of Route 44. Crash, succumbs to injuries. Catherine Mills had died without regaining consciousness. The article mentioned she was survived by her mother, Elizabeth Mills of Petersham. But what made my blood run cold was the photo. A grainy, black and white image, clearly from some happier time. Catherine and James at what looked like a party. She was wearing a white dress. Her hair was feathered, 80s style. It was her. The woman from my car. I printed the articles and left the library in a daze. I considered driving by the Mills house, which the article had mentioned was on Oak Street, but what would I say? "Hi, I think I gave your daughter a ride last night, except she's been dead for 30 years. I drove back to Boston that day, taking a different route. I tried to put it behind me to find some logical explanation. Maybe I'd seen the article before somehow, or heard the story, and my tired brain had constructed an elaborate hallucination. But 3 weeks later, I received a letter at my apartment. No return address, just a Petersham postmark. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in shaky script. "Dear Ms. Whitmore, I hope you'll forgive me for obtaining your address. I placed an advertisement in several newspapers seeking people who might have encountered my daughter, Catherine, and the Petersham librarian was kind enough to contact me when she learned of your interest in the accident. You are not the first to see her. Since her death in 1988, others have reported picking up a young woman in a white dress along Route 44 during snowstorms, always in February, always near where the accident occurred. She always vanishes. I have only one request. If you see my Catherine again, please tell her I've kept her room exactly as she left it, and I'm still waiting for her to come home." Elizabeth Mills. I never responded to the letter. What could I say? But I did some research. There have been 17 documented encounters with a young woman in white on that stretch of Route 44 since 1988. Always in February, always during snowstorms. The intersection where James and Catherine crashed has an unusually high rate of single-vehicle accidents, with many drivers reporting swerving to avoid a woman in the road. I don't drive through the Berkshires anymore if I can help it. I've taken a different territory at work, one that keeps me in eastern Massachusetts. I don't know what I experienced that night, a ghost, a hallucination, something else entirely. But I know what I saw and what I didn't see when I looked back at that empty passenger seat. So if you're ever driving Route 44 through western Massachusetts on a snowy February night and you see a young woman in a white dress at the roadside, well, I can't tell you what to do. But whatever you decide, know that Catherine Mills is still out there, 30 years after her death, trying to get home to a mother who's still waiting. Story 8. Ikoaikin. I still can't sleep properly, not since that night. I know what I experienced wasn't a hallucination or some kind of sleep-deprived delusion. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head, trying to rationalize what happened, but I can't. I'm writing this down because I need to tell someone, and maybe putting it into words will help me process it. I took the census job because I needed the money. Simple as that. I'm a doctoral student in statistics at Westlake University, and my stipend barely covers rent. When I saw the posting for overnight data entry at Census Region 317, midnight to 8 a.m., $15 an hour, it seemed perfect. I could work while campus was quiet, sleep during the day, and still have time for my research. Plus, the job description mentioned it would involve working with demographic data, which aligned with my dissertation on population trends. My first 2 weeks were mind-numbingly boring, but exactly what I expected. Census Region 317 operated out of the Parkview Professional Building, a 6-story concrete structure from the 70s. The census office occupied the entire 4th floor, a maze of beige cubicles, fluorescent lighting, and the constant hum of ancient computers. My job was simple: transfer information from paper census submissions into the secure government database. During my shift, I was usually alone, except for the security guard who did rounds once every 2 hours. Then came April 17th. It was storming that night. One of those spring thunderstorms where the rain hits the windows like someone throwing handfuls of pebbles. I arrived soaking wet despite my umbrella. The security guard, Hector, gave me a sympathetic nod as I signed in, water dripping onto the visitor log. "Gonna be a rough one, Dr. Morgan," he said. He always called me doctor, even though I kept telling him I was still working on my PhD. "I've got coffee and statistics journals to keep me company," I replied, wringing out my coat sleeve. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt longer than usual. The building creaked and groaned around me as the storm intensified. When the doors opened, I was greeted by darkness. The motion sensor lights hadn't activated, which was strange because they always turned on automatically. I fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight, but just as I pulled it out, the lights flickered on. I settled at my desk and logged into the system, pulling up the batch of forms I needed to process that night. Everything was normal for the first hour or so. The rain continued to pound against the windows, and occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the empty office in brief, harsh bursts. Around 1:30, I got up to refill my coffee mug, and that's when I first noticed something odd. The floor near the break room was wet, not just damp, but with distinct puddles forming a trail. I assumed it was roof leakage from the storm, but when I looked up, the ceiling tiles were bone dry. The puddles formed a distinct path, like footprints, leading from the elevator toward the records room at the back of the office. I followed the wet trail, coffee forgotten. The footprints were roughly adult-sized but oddly shaped, as if the person had been wearing old-fashioned shoes. As I approached the records room, the temperature dropped noticeably. I could see my breath fogging in front of me, even though it was mid-April and the building's heating system was still active. The records room door was ajar, which was definitely not normal. This room housed original census documents going back decades, irreplaceable historical records that were kept under lock and key. Only Director Whitmore and the senior staff had access. I should have called security right then, but curiosity got the better of me. I pushed the door open wider, wincing at the loud creak it made. The motion lights flickered on, revealing rows of metal filing cabinets and shelves stacked with bankers' boxes. The wet footprints continued inside, leading directly to a cabinet labeled 1950, District 7. The drawer of this cabinet was partially open, and a folder was lying on the floor beside it, its contents spilled out. Census forms. I knelt down to collect them, noticing they were all from one neighborhood, Lakeside Drive. As I gathered the papers, my hand froze over one particular form. The Wilcox family at 1421 Lakeside Drive. I don't know why this specific form caught my attention, but something about it made the hair on my arms stand up. The form listed Robert Wilcox, 42, and Margaret Wilcox, 39, but there were obvious erasure marks in the spaces below their names, as if additional family members had been recorded and then removed. My computer back at my desk suddenly made a loud error noise, startling me so badly I dropped the form. When I returned to my cubicle, the screen was frozen on a census entry form for 1421 Lakeside Drive, the same address from the paper record I'd just found. But this was impossible. I hadn't been working on historical records. My assignment was current year submissions. I tried to exit the program, but nothing happened. I pressed Ctrl+Alt+Delete, but the screen remained frozen. Then, without me touching the keyboard, text began appearing in the additional household members field. Samuel Wilcox, 8, Abigail Wilcox, 6. The building's electricity flickered, and for a moment, everything went dark. When the lights came back on, my computer had rebooted itself, showing only the standard login screen as if nothing had happened. My heart was racing. I told myself it was just a power surge from the storm causing computer glitches. I decided to take a short break, maybe call Hector to check if the building was having electrical issues. I headed toward the elevator but stopped when I heard it activating. I wasn't expecting anyone. My shift was the only one scheduled overnight. The elevator indicator showed it was coming up from the lobby. When it arrived with a cheerful ding, the doors slid open to reveal nothing. The elevator was empty. Before I could process this, the wet footprints, which had begun to dry, suddenly reappeared, fresh and glistening in the fluorescent light. Only now there were multiple sets, 2 large sets and 2 smaller ones like children's feet. They moved across the floor in real time, with no visible bodies creating them, heading back toward the records room. I should have left. Any rational person would have grabbed their things and bolted down the stairwell. Instead, I followed the footprints again, drawn by some compulsion I still can't explain. When I reached the records room, the temperature had dropped so drastically that I could see ice crystals forming on the metal cabinets. The folder with the Wilcox family form was now on a table in the center of the room, open, with the form prominently displayed. As I approached the table, something impossible happened. The hundreds of census forms stored in the surrounding cabinets began to rustle. Drawers slid open of their own accord, and papers lifted into the air, swirling around the room like leaves caught in a whirlwind. They moved with purpose, gathering and folding and aligning themselves until they formed distinct shapes, human shapes. 2 adult-sized figures took form first, constructed entirely of yellowed census papers. They had no facial features, just blank spaces where faces should be, but their postures conveyed unmistakable grief. Behind them, 2 smaller figures began to form, children, but these shapes remained incomplete, transparent in places, as if they lacked sufficient material to fully manifest. A voice filled the room, not spoken aloud but somehow projected directly into my mind. We were here, we existed, but they wouldn't count us. The smaller paper constructs, the children, reached toward the Wilcox census form on the table. The pages of their paper bodies rustled with the movement, creating a sound like dry leaves scraping across pavement. Samuel and Abigail, the voice continued. We died the week before the census taker came. Father insisted we be counted. We were part of the household on April 1st, the official census date. But the enumerator said the dead don't count. I understood then. These were the Wilcox children, somehow bound to these records, caught in some bureaucratic limbo because they'd been erased from official existence. They marked us out, the voice said, and the paper children seemed to flicker, becoming even more transparent. They struck our names from the record. We've been waiting 70 years to be counted. My hands were shaking as I approached the table. The Wilcox forms still showed just the parents, with those telling erasure marks below their names. Next to it lay a pen that I hadn't noticed before, an old-fashioned fountain pen that looked like it belonged in a museum. I knew what I needed to do. I picked up the pen and, in the spaces where the erasure marks were, carefully wrote, Samuel Wilcox, 8, Abigail Wilcox, 6. As soon as I finished writing, the swirling papers dropped to the floor. The temperature began to rise, and the paper constructs collapsed. But before they completely disintegrated, I saw the child figures become momentarily solid and complete. They reached for the adult figures, and for a brief instant they appeared to embrace before all 4 paper constructs scattered across the floor. I gathered all the forms, my hands still trembling, and placed them back in their folder. On instinct, I added a sticky note marked Amended Record and placed it in the outbox for processing. By the time I left the records room, the wet footprints had vanished. My computer was functioning normally, the storm had passed, and the office looked exactly as it always did. I spent the rest of my shift jumping at every sound, but nothing else unusual occurred. When Director Whitmore arrived at 8 in the morning to relieve me, I must have looked as rattled as I felt. He studied my face for a moment, then glanced at the outbox where I'd placed the amended Wilcox record. Rough night? He asked, picking up the folder and examining my sticky note without surprise. I found some discrepancies in the 1950 records, I managed to say. He nodded slowly. It happens more often than you'd think. Census takers are human. They make mistakes. Sometimes they deliberately overlook households due to prejudice, politics, personal grudges. He placed the folder carefully in his briefcase. The census is sacred, Dr. Morgan. It's the most democratic thing our government does, counting every person, acknowledging their existence. Everyone must be counted, eventually. The way he emphasized that last word made me think he knew exactly what had happened. I've been researching the Wilcox family since that night. I found old newspaper articles about a house fire at 1421 Lakeside Drive in March of 1950, just days before the census. Samuel and Abigail Wilcox perished in the blaze. Their father, Robert Wilcox, had indeed insisted to the census taker that his children be included, arguing that they were alive on April 1st, the official census date, even if they weren't alive when the enumerator visited. Following protocol, the enumerator included them initially, but then struck their names from the record. I still work the night shift at Census Region 317. Every few weeks, I find a mysterious form on my desk when I arrive, always for the Wilcox family, always with all 4 family members listed. The forms look official, but are dated for the current census year, as if the family still exists. I file these as historical amendments, and Director Whitmore never questions them. I've come to believe that the census isn't just about counting the living. Sometimes it's about acknowledging those who existed, making sure they're remembered in our official record. And sometimes, in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, I hear the gentle rustle of papers from the records room, like a whispered, "Thank you." Story 9. I still struggle to talk about what happened to my family at Twin Lakes. It's been almost 8 years now, but I get this cold pit in my stomach whenever I think about it. My wife says I should just let it go, but how do you let go of something you can't explain? I'm Richard Caldwell. Back in September of 2015, I took my wife Diane and our 2 teenagers, Ethan and Melissa, camping in San Isabel National Forest. We'd been to Twin Lakes several times before. It was one of our favorite spots in Colorado. We're an outdoor family, always have been. I work in construction management, and spending time in nature has always been my way of unwinding from the stress of project deadlines and client demands. We arrived at the campsite around 3 in the afternoon on Friday. The weather was perfect, that crisp fall air that makes you grateful to be alive. We had a spot about 70 yards from the shoreline with a great view of the lakes and mountains. Ethan and I set up our 2 tents while Diane and Melissa gathered firewood and organized our supplies. By early evening, we had a nice fire going and were grilling some burgers. I remember the exact moment when things started feeling wrong. Diane was mid-sentence, talking about some drama with the PTA at school, when she suddenly stopped and looked around. "Do you hear that?" she asked. We all went quiet, and that was exactly it. Quiet. Complete silence. No birds, no insects, no rustling leaves, nothing. Just the crackling of our fire. "That's weird," Ethan said. "Where did all the animals go?" I tried to play it off. Probably just a predator in the area. Maybe a mountain lion passed through. But it didn't feel right. I've been camping my whole life, and I've experienced moments of forest silence before. This was different. It felt deliberate. Almost like the silence itself was watching us. We went to bed around 10 that night. I was almost asleep when it started. This sound that's impossible to describe accurately. It was like a deep, pulsating hum that vibrated through the ground and into my chest. Not quite mechanical, not quite organic. It reminded me of those videos where they put sand on metal plates and vibrate them to create patterns, except this sound seemed to have layers to it. I sat up and checked my watch. 11:32 p.m. The sound continued for exactly 3 minutes before abruptly stopping. I know because I timed it, thinking it might be important. Diane was wide awake beside me, her hand gripping my arm so tightly it left marks. From the other tent, I heard Ethan whisper, "Dad, what was that?" "Probably just some weird equipment from one of the ranger stations," I said, not believing it for a second. We eventually fell back asleep, but I kept waking up throughout the night, feeling like something was watching our campsite. When morning finally came, I was exhausted but relieved to see sunlight. That relief didn't last long. Ethan went to fill our water containers at the stream about 20 yards from our campsite. He came running back, his face pale. "Dad, you need to see this." I followed him to the stream bank, and there they were, 3 separate piles of stones arranged in perfect triangles, spaced exactly 10 yards apart. Each pile had exactly 7 stones of nearly identical size and coloration. It wasn't something that could have happened naturally. Someone, or something, had placed them there deliberately. "Did you do this?" Diane asked Ethan when we showed her. "No, I just found them like this." I walked further along the stream bank and discovered another triangular arrangement, again exactly 10 yards from the last one. Then another, and another. They formed a perfect line that pointed directly at our campsite. "Maybe it's just some weird trail marker system," I suggested, though I knew that wasn't the case. These weren't normal trail markers, and they hadn't been there the previous day. We tried to enjoy the rest of the morning. I took Ethan fishing while Diane and Melissa stayed at camp to read. Around 2 in the afternoon, Melissa called out to me from the shoreline where she'd been skipping stones. "Dad," she said quietly when I approached, "there's someone standing over there." She pointed across the lake to a stand of pine trees. At first, I didn't see anything, but then I noticed it. A tall, unnaturally thin figure standing absolutely motionless among the trees. It was difficult to make out details at that distance, but something about its proportions seemed wrong. Too tall, too still. "It hasn't moved at all," Melissa said. "I've been watching for like 20 minutes. I grabbed our binoculars from the tent, but even with them I couldn't make out any clear features. just this dark, vertical shape that blended partially with the trees. I'm going to check it out, I decided, partly out of concern and partly to show my family there was nothing to be afraid of. I took our small aluminum fishing boat across the lake, which took about 15 minutes. The entire time, the figure remained completely still. When I reached the other shore, I approached cautiously, calling out, "Hello, anyone there?" There was nothing. No figure, no person, no footprints in the soft earth. But what I did find chilled me to the bone. Another triangle of stones, identical to the others, but this one had a perfectly preserved deer skull positioned precisely in the center. The antlers had been removed, and the eye sockets were packed with a mixture of clay from the lakeshore and what looked like crushed herbs or plants. I took some photos with my phone and hurried back to my family. I didn't tell them about the skull immediately. I didn't want to frighten them, but I knew we needed to be more vigilant. "Probably just a hiker who moved on," I lied when I returned. That evening, we built the fire extra large and decided we'd take turns staying awake throughout the night. I took the first watch while everyone else tried to sleep. At exactly 11:30 p.m., I checked my watch repeatedly. The humming sound returned. This time it was louder, more intense. Ethan bolted upright from his sleeping bag. "Dad, can you feel that?" he asked. I could. With each pulse of the sound came a physical sensation, like waves of pressure moving through the air. The weirdest part was that our flashlights and Diane's e-reader started flickering in perfect rhythm with the pulses. Even our battery-powered lantern, which had been working perfectly, began to synchronize with the sound. The humming continued for exactly 5 minutes this time before stopping. Then we heard it, movement all around our campsite. Not footsteps exactly, but a sort of sliding, rustling sound that circled us completely. I shone my flashlight in the direction of the sounds, but nothing was visible. The beam of light seemed to stop short, as if the darkness beyond our campsite was somehow denser than normal darkness. Diane and Melissa were both awake now, too. We huddled together near the fire, all of us facing outward like some kind of defensive formation. "Look up," Melissa whispered around 1 in the morning. Above our campsite, directly overhead, was a perfect circular void in the night sky. Not a cloud. Clouds have irregular edges and movement. This was a perfectly round absence of stars, as if someone had cut a hole in the fabric of the night. None of us slept after that. We kept the fire going and stayed close together until dawn finally broke. As soon as it was light, enough, I started packing up our gear. "We're leaving," I announced. No one argued. While dismantling the tents, Ethan called me over to the edge of our campsite. "Dad, they're everywhere now." Surrounding our entire campsite, spaced at precise intervals, was a complete circle of the same triangular stone arrangements we'd found by the stream. There were at least 20 of them, forming a perfect perimeter around us. What terrified me most was the realization that someone, or something, had placed these stones during the night while we were all awake and watching. Yet none of us had seen anyone approach. Then Diane screamed. At the exact center of where our tents had been was a drawing pressed into the soil, geometric patterns surrounding what appeared to be stick figures in the exact positions we had maintained during our nighttime vigil. 4 figures, arranged precisely as we had been, enclosed within concentric circles and triangular patterns. We threw our remaining gear haphazardly into our packs and practically ran to the car. I called the ranger station as soon as we got cell service. A ranger named Michael Torres met us at the station. He seemed skeptical, but agreed to accompany us back to the campsite to investigate. When we arrived, the stone arrangements were gone. All of them disappeared without a trace. The soil drawing was still visible, but as Torres pointed out, it looked weathered, as if it had been there for weeks rather than hours. He took some photos and filed a report, but I could tell he thought we were either pranking him or had been pranked ourselves. What made me absolutely certain that what we experienced was real was learning that 2 other camping groups, miles apart from us, reported nearly identical experiences during that same weekend. One group even managed to capture a photo with a wildlife camera they'd set up. A triangular arrangement of stones illuminated by the camera's infrared flash recorded at exactly 11:33 p.m. The rangers installed more wildlife cameras in the area after our reports. All of them simultaneously malfunctioned between 11:30 and 11:35 p.m. for several nights afterward. Then the phenomena simply stopped. It's been almost 8 years, and I still don't have an explanation for what happened at Twin Lakes. Whatever it was wasn't random or natural. There was intelligence behind it, a methodical quality to everything we experienced. It was as if something was constructing a controlled environment around us, studying our reactions. We haven't been camping since. Ethan's in college now, and Melissa's in her last year of high school. Sometimes I catch them looking up at the night sky with this worried expression, and I know they're thinking about it too. That perfect circular void above our campsite. The strangest part, about once a year, usually around late September, our household electronics will all flicker simultaneously for exactly 3 minutes. No power outage, no storm, no explanation. Just 3 minutes of synchronized flickering, and then everything returns to normal. I don't talk about Twin Lakes much anymore. People either think you're crazy or they try to explain it away. But I know what we experienced. Something was there with us. Something methodical, patient, and intelligent. And sometimes, on quiet nights when I can't sleep, I swear I can still feel those pulses of pressure moving through the air, studying me, measuring my reactions. Whatever it was, I don't think it was finished with its observations. Story 10. And? I never thought I'd share this, but I need to get it off my chest. It's been 7 years since that day in 2016, and I still wake up in cold sweats sometimes, checking the corners of my bedroom for cameras that aren't there. My name is Sarah Reyes. I was a detective with the San Antonio PD for almost 12 years before everything fell apart. I worked homicide, thought I'd seen the worst humanity had to offer. Turns out I hadn't seen anything yet. It started on a Tuesday morning in March. Nothing special about the day. Came in with my coffee from the place across the street, nodded to Rodriguez at the front desk, and headed to my desk to tackle the mountain of paperwork waiting for me. I remember it was raining that morning, and my shoes squeaked on the linoleum as I walked to the surveillance room to check some footage for a case I was working. That's when I noticed it. At first, I thought I was just tired or the coffee hadn't kicked in yet. The monitor labeled Interrogation 3 was showing a perfect overhead view of the room, clear as day. Problem is, there's no overhead camera in that room, just the standard one in the corner. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. Still there. I called over Mendez, the tech guy who usually manned the surveillance equipment. "Hey, when did we get new cameras installed in Interrogation 3? He looked at me funny. "We didn't." We both stared at the screen. The angle was impossible, like someone had mounted a camera in the ceiling directly above the table, but there was nothing there. I'd been in that room 1,000 times. "Maybe it's a glitch," Mendez suggested, but his voice had that edge to it, the one that says he doesn't believe his own words. By noon, we discovered 7 more impossible camera angles throughout the precinct. Views from inside locked evidence lockers. A perfect shot from inside the captain's private bathroom. Views from inside the walls. Angles that couldn't exist. But that wasn't even the weirdest part. In every feed, the officers' faces were wrong. Not blurred exactly, but obscured by floating badge numbers that hovered right in front of their faces. Like some kind of high-tech redaction happening in real time. And the timestamps. All of them read exactly 24 hours ahead. I remember staring at one screen showing the break room with a timestamp for Wednesday, 11:17 a.m. In it, Officer Perez was spilling coffee all over his uniform. I made a note of it, thinking I could disprove whatever was happening. The next day, at exactly 11:17, I stood in the doorway of the break room and watched Perez knock over his mug, coffee spreading across his shirt exactly like in the footage. My blood went cold. This wasn't a technical glitch. Around 2 that afternoon, Michael Torres from cybercrime practically ran into the surveillance room. His face was pale, hands shaking. "My laptop," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "It's pulling up case files I never accessed. Personal files on officers, medical records, financial statements, stuff that shouldn't even be on our network." I followed him back to his desk. His screen was cycling through documents so fast I could barely register what I was seeing. Personnel files, psychiatric evaluations, private text messages between officers and their families. "This is all stored on air-gapped systems," Torres said, his voice cracking. "This shouldn't be possible." By 3 p.m., reports were coming in from all over the precinct. Body cameras activating by themselves when officers were off duty, at home with their families. Patrol car computers displaying GPS coordinates that matched officers' home addresses, their parents' addresses, their kids' schools. One officer broke down crying when his cruiser's navigation system started giving directions to his daughter's dance recital, an event he hadn't told anyone at work about. The captain called an emergency meeting, but nobody wanted to use the conference room. Something about the cameras watching us. We ended up in the parking garage, huddled between patrol cars like conspirators. "Could be a hack," the captain suggested, but even he didn't sound convinced. "Some kind of sophisticated system breach." "This isn't a hack," Torres said. "Our systems aren't even connected like this. And some of this tech, it doesn't exist. Not commercially, not even experimentally." That's when my phone buzzed, a voicemail from a number listed as my own. When I played it, my blood turned to ice. It was my voice, but not quite. Slightly mechanical, like those AI voice generators, but perfect enough that anyone would think it was me. "Detective Reyes," my own voice said to me, "Surveillance Protocol 0 has been initiated. For your safety and the safety of others, do not attempt to investigate further." I wasn't the only one. Within minutes, half the officers were playing similar messages, all from their own numbers, all in their own voices, all mentioning this Surveillance Protocol 0. By 5 p.m., we'd shut down every computer in the building, disconnected every camera, and called in specialists from the FBI's cybercrime unit. They arrived within the hour, bringing equipment I'd never seen before, scanning for bugs, for wireless signals, for anything that could explain what was happening. They found nothing, absolutely nothing. But the surveillance continued. Screens we'd physically unplugged came back to life. Phones we'd removed batteries from rang with those same automated messages. It was like the whole precinct had become a living, breathing surveillance organism. That night I went home, took 3 different routes, checked for tails, the whole paranoid routine. I showered with the bathroom fan on to cover any listening devices, slept with my gun under my pillow. I remember checking the time before I finally fell asleep. 1:15 a.m. The next morning, I arrived early to find the captain and half the command staff huddled around a monitor in the surveillance room. Their faces were ashen. On the screen was security footage from our server room, time-stamped 3:33 a.m. In it, I could see myself, clear as day, entering the server room with my keycard, walking directly to the main server bank and connecting something to it. My movements were strange, mechanical, almost, robotic. But it was definitely me. "I was home," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I was asleep." The captain just looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and suspicion. "We checked the keycard logs," he said. "Your card accessed that door at exactly 3:33 a.m. "That's impossible," I insisted. "I was home. You can check my home security system, my phone GPS." But even as I said it, I knew those things could be manipulated. If whatever was happening could predict the future and access secure systems, what was a home alarm or phone GPS? They started calling it a surveillance possession episode, as if giving it a name made it less terrifying. By noon, things escalated beyond anything we could have imagined. Every screen in the precinct, computers, phones, even the ancient TV in the break room, suddenly displayed the same thing. Live feeds from officers' body cameras, but not just any feeds. Each officer could see themselves from the perspective of their own camera, watching themselves on a screen that showed them watching themselves, an infinite recursive loop of surveillance. I remember Jenkins screaming, tearing his body camera off and stomping on it, only to see the feed continue uninterrupted. Then the power went out. Total darkness for exactly 3 minutes and 33 seconds. When the lights came back on, every unsolved case file in our system had been modified. New notes added to each one, written from the perspectives of the victims, details no one could have known. A murdered child describing the face of her killer, a disappeared teenager explaining exactly where his body had been hidden, all written in first person, as if the victims themselves had accessed our system. Homeland Security arrived by nightfall. They quarantined the building, confiscated every piece of technology. We were debriefed individually in a mobile command center they'd set up in the parking lot, surrounded by equipment that looked military-grade. The agent who interviewed me had the kind of eyes that had seen things he wished he could forget. "We've found something," he said after hours of questions. "The surveillance systems in your precinct contain chipsets that weren't part of the original manufacturing specs. Hidden hardware, installed during production, creating a parallel surveillance network we can't access or control." "Who would do that?" I asked. He just shook his head. "We don't know. The technology, it's beyond what we've seen before, a decade ahead at least." I turned in my badge the next day. Couldn't do it anymore. Not after what happened. Not after seeing myself in that server room when I know I was home asleep. The official report called it a sophisticated cyber attack targeting law enforcement surveillance systems. Classified, buried, forgotten. But I still see things sometimes. Reflections in windows that move wrong. My face in the mirror with eyes that don't blink when they should. Sometimes I catch glimpses of surveillance footage of myself in reflective surfaces, doing things I have no memory of doing. I've moved 3 times since then, changed my name, gotten rid of every smart device in my life, but I still feel it watching, still hear those words in my own voice. Surveillance Protocol 0 has been initiated. The worst part? No one believes me. They think I had some kind of breakdown. Maybe I did, but that doesn't explain how Torres went missing 2 months later. Doesn't explain why 5 other officers from my precinct have since been institutionalized. Doesn't explain the unmarked vans that still park outside my apartment sometimes. So I'm putting this out there for whatever it's worth. If you work in law enforcement, check your surveillance systems. Look for angles that shouldn't exist. Watch for timestamps that don't match. Listen for your own voice calling you from your own number. And if you hear about Surveillance Protocol 0, run. Just run. Scenes Fiend, Story 11. I still can't sleep well when it rains. It's been almost 3 months since that night on Highway 1, and I keep replaying everything in my mind. I've told a few close friends, but they just give me that look. You know the one, like I've completely lost it. I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I was driving back from a photography assignment in Big Sur last November. It was supposed to be a simple 3-day trip to shoot coastal landscapes for a travel magazine, but a storm system moved in faster than expected on my return drive. By 6 in the evening, the fog had become so thick I could barely see 20 feet ahead. Anyone who's driven Highway 1 knows how treacherous it can be. Sheer cliffs dropping 300 feet into the Pacific on one side, jagged rock face on the other, and a winding 2-lane road with barely any shoulder in between. I probably should have found a motel and waited it out, but I was already running late. My editor needed the photos by morning, and cell service was practically non-existent, so I couldn't even call to explain the delay. The rational decision would have been to pull over, but I kept going, white-knuckling the steering wheel at about 15 miles per hour. My headlights were practically useless, just reflecting back at me off the wall of mist. I had the driver's side window cracked open an inch, listening for oncoming traffic since I could barely see the yellow center line. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm as drizzle collected on the glass. My nerves were shot. Every curve felt like it might be my last if I misjudged even slightly. I was approaching Miller's Point. I remember because I'd just passed a road sign that was barely visible in my headlights. The fog was getting even thicker, if that was possible. I leaned forward in my seat, straining to follow the fog line at the edge of the road, using it as my only real guide. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought it was a reflection, or maybe a road marker I hadn't noticed before. But then it moved, a human figure, standing exactly on the fog line. I hit the brakes instinctively, my heart practically exploding in my chest. My tires squealed slightly on the wet pavement, and I came to a stop about 15 feet from her. She was just standing there, a woman in a pale blue raincoat, hood pulled up. Even through the fog and rain, I could tell she was completely soaked, not just wet from rain, but drenched as if she'd been submerged in water. Her clothes clung to her body in a way that didn't look right. I remember thinking how dangerous it was for her to be standing there, right on the edge where a car could easily clip her and send her over the cliff. I rolled down my window further and called out, asking if she needed help. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she moved toward my car with this strange, fluid motion that sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't normal walking. It was too smooth, yet somehow disjointed at the same time, like watching someone move underwater in slow motion, but with occasional jerky movements. When she reached my window, I could see her face beneath the hood. She looked to be in her 30s, with pale skin and dark hair plastered to her forehead. Her eyes were what got me. They seemed to reflect no light at all, just two dark pools. Water dripped steadily from her coat, her hair, her fingertips, forming a small puddle beside my car. "Turn around," she said. Her voice was clear but distant, like she was speaking through some kind of filter. "The bridge at Miller's Point has collapsed. 2 vehicles are already gone." I remember feeling confused. "What? When did this happen?" 17 minutes ago, she replied, with such specific certainty that it caught me off guard. "The support beams gave way. The whole middle section is gone." I fumbled for my phone, thinking I should call 911, but I had no signal. "How do you know this? Did you see it happen? Are you hurt?" That's when she said something that made my blood run cold. I was the first. November 14th, 1983. I stared at her, not comprehending. "The first what?" "The first to go over," she said, water continuing to drip from her sleeve onto my door panel. "Time thins in certain places along this highway, especially in the fog. I've been warning drivers for 40 years now. I'm not a superstitious person. I don't believe in ghosts or supernatural stuff. At least, I didn't before that night. But something about her certainty, combined with the impossible way she moved and the way the water kept flowing from her clothes even though we'd been talking for several minutes, it shook me to my core. "There's a turnout 200 yards back," she continued. "You can turn around there. You need to do it now. The bridge won't hold much longer." I wanted to dismiss her as some kind of mentally ill person wandering the highway, but my instincts were screaming at me to listen. I found myself nodding. "Okay, I'll turn around." A look of relief crossed her face, the first real emotion I'd seen. "Thank you. Most don't listen until it's too late." I started to reverse slowly, keeping my eyes on her in my rearview mirror. She remained standing at the fog line, watching me. I found the turnout exactly where she said it would be and carefully maneuvered my car to face the opposite direction. As I was completing the turn, my headlights swept across something I hadn't noticed before, a small memorial plaque attached to the guardrail at the turnout. I stopped the car and, against my better judgment, got out to look at it. The rain had let up slightly, but the fog was still thick around me. I used my phone's flashlight to read the inscription. "In memory of Catherine Miller, November 14th, 1983. May she find peace beyond these waters." My entire body went cold. Catherine Miller. The date matched exactly what the woman had told me, Miller's Point. It couldn't be coincidence. I jumped back in my car and locked the doors, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. I managed to get a single bar of cell service at the turnout, and I immediately searched for information about a bridge collapse at Miller's Point in 1983. It took several attempts with the spotty connection, but eventually I found an archived news article. Tragic accident at Miller's Point, November 15, 1983. A local woman, Catherine Miller, 34, lost her life yesterday evening when her vehicle plunged over the cliff edge at what locals know as Miller's Point on Highway 1. Authorities believe poor visibility due to coastal fog may have contributed to the accident. Miller was a respected marine biologist and environmental advocate. The location was named after her grandfather, who operated a small fishing business from the cove below. Services will be held. I couldn't read anymore. I felt sick to my stomach. I turned off my phone and sat there in the darkness, listening to the rain and the distant sound of waves crashing on the rocks below. The woman, Catherine, was nowhere to be seen when I looked out. I drove back the way I came, taking an inland route that added almost 2 hours to my journey. I barely remember the drive. I was on autopilot, trying to rationalize what had happened. Maybe I'd read about the accident sometime before and forgotten about it. Maybe the woman was just a local who knew the history and was playing a twisted prank. The next morning, I was editing my photos when a breaking news alert popped up on my laptop. Structural failure at Miller's Point Bridge on Highway 1, 2 vehicles missing. According to the report, at approximately 7:15 the previous evening, about an hour after my encounter, part of the bridge at Miller's Point had indeed collapsed during the storm. 2 vehicles were believed to have gone over the edge. Search and rescue operations were hampered by continued bad weather. That was the moment I knew it was all real. I've gone back since then, in daylight, to try to make sense of it all. The memorial plaque is there, weathered by decades of salt air. The bridge has been temporarily repaired while they work on a more permanent solution. I've spoken with a few locals, casually bringing up old stories about Highway 1. One elderly man at a coffee shop in Carmel told me, unprompted, that there have been stories for years about a woman in blue who appears in the fog. Highway ghost, he called her, only shows up when there's danger ahead. I don't know what to believe anymore. All I know is that Catherine Miller saved my life that night. Sometimes I wonder how many others she's saved over the 40 years she's been standing vigil on that fog line. And I wonder if she'll ever find peace, or if she's somehow bound to that stretch of highway forever. I still drive Highway 1 for work sometimes, but never in fog, never at night. And whenever I pass Miller's Point, I slow down and whisper a thank you, just in case she's listening. Because whatever happened that night, whether it was a ghost, a time slip, or something else entirely, I'm alive because of her warning. Has anyone else encountered something like this? Am I crazy for believing what happened? I need to know I'm not alone in this. Story 12. I've never really spoken about this before, at least not to people outside my family. I'm not sure why I feel compelled to share it now. Maybe because enough time has passed, or maybe because I still can't shake what happened that Easter weekend in 1998. I was 20 years old, a sophomore at UMass Amherst, heading home for Easter break, but not to my parents' house in Connecticut, to my grandmother's Victorian in western Massachusetts. The whole extended family was gathering there, which wasn't unusual for holidays. But I'd been having these weird dreams about the place for months. Nothing specific, just a feeling of unease and the image of the old carriage house that sat about 50 feet behind the main house. The property had been in our family since the early 1900s. It was beautiful in that haunting New England way, faded grandeur with good bones, as my mom would say. The carriage house had been sealed off for as long as I could remember. When we were kids, my cousins and I made up stories about what might be inside, but we were strictly forbidden from trying to get in. It's structurally unsound, my grandmother would say with a finality that brooked no argument. When I arrived that Friday afternoon, the house was already buzzing with relatives. My grandmother, Ellen, was 83 then, but sharp as ever. She had this way of seeing right through you, like she could read your thoughts. I noticed immediately that something was off with her. She kept glancing out the kitchen window toward the carriage house when she thought no one was looking. During dinner, my Uncle Paul mentioned that he'd seen a blue light coming from the carriage house windows the night before. Grandma Ellen dropped her fork with a clatter. "You know how the sunset plays tricks through those old wavy glass panes," she said too quickly. "Besides, those windows have been boarded up for decades." Everyone moved on to other topics, but I caught my grandmother's hands trembling as she reached for her water glass. That night, I couldn't sleep. My old bedroom faced the backyard with a clear view of the carriage house. Around 2 in the morning, I could have sworn I heard singing, faint, like an old record playing somewhere far away. A woman's voice singing what sounded like a hymn. I pressed my face against the cold window glass but saw nothing unusual. The next morning, while helping to prepare for Sunday's Easter lunch, I brought up the carriage house casually to my mom. "Why has it been locked up all these years? Couldn't it be fixed up? It seems like wasted space." Mom just shrugged. "That's Grandma's business. Some things are better left alone, Eliza." But that non-answer just made me more curious. Throughout the day, I caught Grandma Ellen staring at the carriage house multiple times, her expression a mixture of sadness and fear. When I walked into the sitting room that afternoon, I found her holding an old photo album, hastily closing it when she noticed me. "Everything okay, Grandma?" I asked. "Of course, dear." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Just feeling nostalgic." When she left to help with dinner preparations, I couldn't resist peeking at the album she'd left on the side table. It was open to a page with several photos from what looked like the late 1930s. One showed a young woman with dark hair, styled in loose waves, wearing a blue dress and smiling brightly at the camera. She was beautiful, with something magnetic about her expression. I didn't recognize her, but the resemblance to my side of the family was unmistakable. I flipped the page and found a newspaper clipping with the headline, "Local woman missing, foul play not suspected." The article was dated April 17, 1938, Easter Sunday that year. The woman's name was Ruth Mitchell, age 22. My heart started racing when I realized this must be my grandmother's sister. I'd heard vague mentions of a great-aunt Ruth who'd supposedly run off with a traveling salesman, bringing shame to the family. It was one of those hushed family stories that never got fully explained. The article mentioned Ruth had been seeing a man named James Harrington from one of the wealthiest families in the county. The final line said the Mitchell family believed Ruth had left town voluntarily, despite leaving all her belongings behind. When I heard footsteps approaching, I quickly put the album back exactly as I'd found it. But something clicked in my mind. The carriage house, Grandma's nervous glances, this mysterious disappearance. They were connected somehow. That evening, while everyone was gathered in the living room playing board games, I slipped away to my grandmother's bedroom. I felt awful snooping, but I needed answers. In her jewelry box, I found an old skeleton key with a tag that simply read, CH, Carriage House. I waited until after midnight, when the house was quiet. I pulled on a sweater, grabbed a flashlight, and snuck downstairs. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I made my way through the kitchen and out the back door. The night was cold and clear, with a nearly full moon casting everything in silvery light. The carriage house loomed ahead, its windows like dark, empty eyes. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the lock. When it finally turned, the door opened with a low groan that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet night. I stepped inside, the beam of my flashlight cutting through thick dust and cobwebs. The air was stale and heavy. The interior was mostly empty, some broken gardening tools, a few crates, nothing remarkable. But something felt wrong. The floor had newer boards in the center, not ancient like the rest of the structure. They stood out, lighter in color, less worn. I knelt down and ran my hand over them. Unlike the rest of the floor, these boards weren't nailed down properly. One shifted slightly under my touch. My heart was pounding in my ears as I worked my fingers around the edge of the loose board and lifted. Beneath it was dirt, but something was buried there, fabric wrapped around something long and narrow. I reached down to touch it when a voice behind me made me scream. "Stop! Don't touch that, Eliza!" I whirled around to find my grandmother standing in the doorway, her face ghostly pale in the moonlight. She looked smaller somehow, fragile. "Grandma, you scared me to death. What are you doing out here?" "I saw the light from your flashlight," she said quietly. "I've been watching that carriage house every night for 60 years. She came in, moving slowly, and lowered herself onto an old crate. She looked at the open floorboard and took a deep, shuddering breath. "It's time. Maybe it's past time." Her voice was steady despite the tears in her eyes. "That's Ruth down there, my sister. She didn't run away with any salesman." The chill that went through me had nothing to do with the night air. What happened to her? She was murdered. Easter Sunday, 1938. We came home from church and found the house in disarray. There had been a struggle. Ruth was gone, but her purse was still here, her clothes, everything. Grandma's voice cracked. She'd been seeing James Harrington, secretly at first because his family would never have approved. He was from money, she was just a shop girl. The man mentioned in the newspaper article. Grandma nodded. Ruth tried to break things off with him that morning. He had a terrible temper. We didn't know where she was for almost a year. My father and uncles searched everywhere. Then one day my father found her remains in the woods on the Harrington property. I felt sick. And they buried her here? Why not go to the police? James Harrington's father was the police in this town, practically. His uncle was the mayor. The family owned the bank that held the mortgage on this house and most others in town. We were told in no uncertain terms that if we pursued it, we'd lose everything, our home, our livelihoods, maybe worse. Grandma looked down at her hands. My father and uncles brought Ruth home in the middle of the night. They buried her here because they couldn't bear the thought of her lying in those woods where he'd left her. At least here, she'd be with family. And no one ever suspected. Oh, everyone suspected. But suspecting isn't proving. James went to law school after that, became a judge eventually, lived a respected life until he died in 1982. The bitterness in her voice was palpable. He got married, had children, grandchildren. Ruth got this. She gestured to the floor. I thought about the blue dress in the photo. The woman in the album, was Ruth wearing a blue dress the day she disappeared? Grandma's eyes widened. Yes, her Easter dress. How did you know? I told her about the singing I'd heard, about Uncle Paul seeing blue light in the windows. That's when she told me about the other things. How every Easter Sunday since Ruth disappeared, strange things happened in the house. The scent of Ruth's rose perfume would suddenly fill rooms with no explanation. Her favorite hymn, In the Garden, would sometimes play from the old phonograph in the sitting room, even though it hadn't worked in decades. Over the years, various children in the family reported seeing a young woman in a blue dress watching from the carriage house windows. We never spoke of these things, Grandma said. What good would it do? But they happened every year, like clockwork. Ruth was trying to tell us something. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then I took my grandmother's hand. We need to tell someone, Grandma. It's not too late for Ruth to get justice. She looked at me with tired eyes. James is dead, Eliza. What justice is there now? The truth, I said simply. Ruth deserves the truth to be told. She deserves a proper burial. And who knows how many other women might have suffered because of this man? There might be other cases, other families wondering what happened to their loved ones. It took some convincing, but eventually Grandma agreed. The next morning, Easter Sunday, we went to the local police. At first, they were skeptical, but when Grandma mentioned James Harrington's name, something changed in the chief's expression. He made some calls, and by that afternoon, state police investigators were at the carriage house. They found Ruth's remains exactly where Grandma said they would be, wrapped in the blue dress she'd been wearing when she disappeared. They also found a locket with her, initials and a silver hairpin, items that matched the description in the original missing persons file from 1938. What happened next became bigger than any of us expected. The state police reopened the original case file and found evidence that had been deliberately overlooked, witness statements from people who'd seen James arguing with Ruth that morning, Ruth's diary where she'd written about his threatening behavior when she tried to end things. It had all been there all along, but no one had been willing to pursue it. Ruth finally received a proper burial in the town cemetery that summer, and the strangest thing, the hauntings stopped. No more perfume, no more music, no ghostly figure in the carriage house windows. I wrote a book about Ruth's case a few years later, which led to something I never expected: the reopening of 3 other unsolved disappearances of young women between 1939 and 1951, all with connections to James Harrington. 2 bodies were eventually found. One family finally got answers after 65 years of wondering. The most disturbing part of all this wasn't just the murder or even the decades-long cover-up. It was how easily justice had been subverted because one man had power and influence. It was how some secrets remain buried not because they can't be found, but because people choose not to look. I still visit Ruth's grave every Easter. I bring blue flowers and sit with her for a while. I like to think she knows that she wasn't forgotten, that her story finally got told. And sometimes, just sometimes, I catch the faintest scent of rose perfume on the breeze. Story 13. I've been a police officer for almost 12 years now, but there's one night I can't shake from my memory. It happened last autumn, around the end of October. I was working the night shift, which I didn't mind because things are usually quieter, and I can patrol without dealing with too much traffic. It was a Wednesday. I remember that clearly because I'd switched shifts with Rodriguez so he could attend his kids' school play. The night started out completely normal. I grabbed coffee from the 24-hour gas station on 5th, like I always do, checked in with dispatch, and began my usual route through the county. It was around 11:30 at night when the call came in about a possible DUI near Oakwood Junction. If you're not familiar with the area, it's this winding stretch of road that connects the highway to the more rural parts of the county. Really bad spot for accidents. Too many sharp turns with poor visibility, and the guardrails haven't been updated in probably 20 years. Anyway, dispatch said a passing motorist reported a car swerving before suddenly pulling over. I wasn't far from there, so I responded and said I'd check it out. When I arrived, I immediately saw the vehicle, a silver Honda Civic parked at an odd angle, half on the shoulder, half on the grass. The headlights were still on, and the engine was running, but I couldn't see anyone inside from where I was parked. I called in my location and the license plate number before approaching. Standard procedure, you know. The night was unusually cold, and there was this light fog hanging in the air that made everything feel a bit surreal. As I got closer, I noticed the driver's side was empty, but the car was definitely still running. That's when I heard it, this rustling sound from the passenger side. I put my hand on my holster, instinct after all these years, and moved around to get a better look. The passenger door suddenly swung open, and this woman practically fell out onto the ground. She was maybe in her mid-20s, wearing jeans and a dark hoodie. Her hair was a mess, and her eyes, God, her eyes were so wide with fear. "Help me," she gasped, scrambling to her feet. "Please, he's trying to kill me." I helped her up, asking who she was talking about, but she was having trouble catching her breath. I guided her toward my patrol car, keeping my eyes on our surroundings. The road was empty except for our 2 vehicles, and the woods that lined the road were pitch black beyond the reach of our headlights. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down and tell me what's happening," I said once I'd seated her in my patrol car with the door open. I didn't want to shut her in. Sometimes that makes people panic more. She told me her name was Ellie Winters. She explained that she'd been driving home from her friend's house in Millerville, about 20 miles away, when she noticed a car following her. At first, she thought it was just someone headed in the same direction, but when she made a few random turns and the car stayed with her, she started to panic. "I pulled over here thinking I could hide until they passed," she said, her voice shaking. "But then I saw him get out of his car too. I think he's in the woods now, watching us." I radioed for backup, giving a brief description of the situation. Protocol would have been to wait, but Ellie was clearly terrified, and if someone dangerous was actually out there, I needed to secure the scene. "Stay here," I told her, making sure my patrol car was locked once she was inside. "I'm going to check your vehicle." Her car was still running, the driver's side door hanging open. I did a quick check of the immediate area with my flashlight before approaching the vehicle. Everything seemed in order, no signs of a struggle inside. The keys were in the ignition, and there was a phone charger plugged into the cigarette lighter. On the floor of the passenger side, I noticed a small backpack, black with some kind of floral pattern. I was about to examine it when I heard Ellie scream from inside my patrol car. I spun around, drawing my weapon, and that's when I saw him, a figure emerging from the tree line about 30 yards away. In the darkness, all I could make out was that it was a man, average height, wearing what looked like a dark jacket. "Police officer, stop right there and identify yourself," I shouted, my flashlight trained on him. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The man stopped and slowly raised his hands. "Don't shoot, I'm just trying to help her. Keep your hands where I can see them and walk toward me slowly," I ordered, maintaining my position. As he got closer, I could see he was probably in his early 30s, clean cut, wearing jeans and a navy jacket. He looked ordinary, not at all like the crazed killer Ellie had described. "My name is Ryan Delaney," he said, still keeping his hands up. "Ellie is my girlfriend. We had a fight, and she drove off upset. I was worried about her driving in that state, so I followed her. I kept my weapon ready, but lowered it slightly. "Stay right there," I told him, then glanced back at my patrol car where Ellie was watching with wide eyes. "Officer, please," Ryan continued, his voice pleading. "She's not well. She has these episodes sometimes where she gets paranoid. I just want to make sure she's safe." The situation was getting confusing fast. I've dealt with domestic disputes before, and they're often a mess of contradicting stories. But something about this felt different, more tense, more dangerous. "She says you're trying to kill her," I stated bluntly, watching his reaction. His face fell. "Oh God, not this again." He ran a hand through his hair, looking genuinely distressed. "Officer, I swear I would never hurt her. She's been having these delusions lately. I've been trying to get her to see someone, but she refuses." Just then, Ellie started banging on the window of my patrol car, screaming something I couldn't make out. "Stay right where you are," I told Ryan firmly, before backing up toward my car, never taking my eyes off him. When I cracked the window to hear Ellie, she was frantic. "He's lying. We broke up months ago. He's been stalking me, sending me threats. Don't believe anything he says." I looked between them, trying to assess who was telling the truth. Both seemed genuinely afraid, but afraid of what? Each other, or being caught in a lie. "I need both of you to stay calm," I said. "Backup is on the way, and we're going to sort this out." Ryan took a step forward. "Officer, please, she's not safe. You don't understand." "I told you to stay where you are," I snapped, raising my weapon again. That's when everything happened so fast. Ryan's eyes darted to something behind me. Ellie had somehow gotten out of the patrol car and was making a run for her own vehicle. Ryan lunged forward, not at me, but trying to get past me. "Stop her!" he yelled. Pure instinct kicked in. I tackled him to the ground, restraining him even as he struggled and kept shouting about stopping Ellie. I managed to get handcuffs on him while he continued to resist. "She's dangerous," he kept saying. "You have to listen to me." By this time, I could hear sirens in the distance. Backup was finally arriving. I had Ryan secured on the ground and turned to check on Ellie. She was standing by her car, clutching that small backpack I'd noticed earlier to her chest. Something about her posture had changed. She seemed calmer now, almost eerily so. 2 patrol cars pulled up, and officers Ramirez and Dawson jumped out. They took over watching Ryan while I approached Ellie. "Are you okay?" I asked her. She nodded, seeming much more composed than just minutes earlier. "I'm sorry about all this. I get so scared when I see him. You don't know what he's put me through. We're going to need statements from both of you," I explained. "And I'd like to see any evidence you have of his threats or stalking behavior." She hesitated, then unzipped the backpack. "I keep everything in here. I started documenting it all when no one would believe me." Inside the bag were several printed photos showing bruises on what she claimed were her arms and back. There were also screenshots of text messages with horrible threats, all apparently from Ryan's number. As she showed me each piece of evidence, I felt a growing certainty that she was telling the truth. Ryan continued to protest his innocence as Ramirez and Dawson put him in the back of their patrol car. I was standing with Ellie, reviewing the materials from her backpack, when something strange happened. As they were closing the door on Ryan, his entire demeanor seemed to shift. The frantic, desperate man was suddenly calm. And then, I'll never forget this, he smiled. Not a normal smile, but this chilling, knowing smirk that made the hair on my neck stand up. "You think you can protect her?" he called out to me. "She'll never be free from me. Never." The way he said it, so cold, so confident, sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the autumn night. I looked back at Ellie, who had wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. We took them both to the station in separate cars. I rode with Ellie, who alternated between periods of intense fear and unusual calmness. When we arrived, I escorted her to an interview room where a female officer took her statement while I went to file my initial report. As I was writing everything up, Deputy Chief Williams came by my desk. "Jensen, what's the deal with these 2 you brought in?" I explained the situation as best I could, including the evidence Ellie had provided. Williams frowned. "Something's not adding up. We ran both their names through the system. Ryan Delaney has no priors, not even a speeding ticket, but Ellie Winters..." He slid a file across my desk. Inside was a report from a neighboring county. 3 months earlier, a man had filed a restraining order against Ellie, claiming she was stalking him after they broke up. There were also records of a psychiatric evaluation following an incident where she'd shown up at his workplace claiming he was trying to kill her. My stomach dropped. I thought about Ryan's desperate pleas, his insistence that she wasn't well. Had I completely misread the situation? I went to the interview room where Ryan was being held. He looked exhausted, his earlier confidence completely gone. "I tried to tell you," he said quietly when I entered. "We dated for 6 months. When I broke it off, she couldn't accept it. At first it was just calls and texts. Then she started showing up places I would be. Then the accusations started, that I was following her, threatening her." "What about the photos? The bruises?" I asked. He shook his head. "I never touched her. Never. Those messages she showed you, she sent them to herself from a burner phone she registered in my name. I tried to get help for her, but she refuses to believe she needs it. I left the room feeling sick. Had I almost arrested an innocent man? Had I been manipulated by a troubled woman who was actually the threat? But then I remembered that smile, that cold, confident smirk as they put him in the patrol car. That wasn't the expression of an innocent man worried about an unwell ex-girlfriend. That was something else entirely. I went back to my desk and started digging deeper. I called Ryan's workplace, speaking to his supervisor. Ryan had taken a personal day, his supervisor confirmed, but added that Ryan had been acting stressed lately, missing work and seeming distracted. I checked property records and found that Ryan had recently purchased a cabin about 5 miles from Oakwood Junction, something he hadn't mentioned. Most disturbing of all, when I had the lab check the backpack Ellie had been carrying, they found a hidden pocket containing newspaper clippings about 2 unsolved assaults in areas where Ryan had previously lived. The victims were all women who resembled Ellie. By morning, the picture was becoming clearer, but no less disturbing. Ellie did have a history of mental health issues, but there was mounting evidence that Ryan might actually be the dangerous one he claimed she was. I never got to find out the whole truth. Around 6 in the morning, as I was finishing my report, an officer came running in saying Ryan had somehow managed to escape custody during a transfer. Despite an extensive search, we couldn't locate him. Ellie was placed in protective custody and later moved to another state under a new identity. The last I heard, she was receiving treatment for her anxiety and PTSD. That night at Oakwood Junction has haunted me ever since. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, seeing Ryan's smile as they put him in that patrol car. I keep wondering, did I miss something crucial? Was Ellie telling the truth all along, or was she the manipulator? And if Ryan really was dangerous, where is he now? Every time I drive past that stretch of road, I can't help but scan the tree line, half expecting to see a figure emerging from the darkness. Some cases you solve, and some solve you, making you question everything you thought you knew about reading people and situations. I still don't know whose story was true, and that's what scares me the most. Story 14. I've never told this story in full before. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Hell, I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't lived through it. But I need to get this off my chest, even if it's just typing it out for strangers on the internet. I was a detective with Detroit PD for almost 20 years. Back in 2002, my partner James Parker and I caught a case that would end up destroying both our careers and nearly our lives. We were investigating the disappearance of Victor Crane, some big-shot businessman who'd vanished without a trace. The brass kept pushing us to wrap it up quickly, but something felt off from the start. Crane had connections to some of the city's more influential people, and every time we started pulling on a thread that led toward them, we'd get a call from upstairs telling us to focus elsewhere. I'd been a cop long enough to recognize the signs of someone pulling strings, but Parker and I were stubborn. We kept digging. It started with little things. I'd noticed the same car in my rearview mirror for miles on my way home. Parker said someone had been in his house. Nothing stolen, just things moved slightly out of place. We both wrote it off as paranoia at first. Cops developed that after a while. It comes with the territory. The night it all went to hell was October 18th. I remember because it was my daughter's birthday the next day, and I'd promised to be home early to help set up for her party. Parker and I were on night patrol, filling in for a sick officer. Not our usual beat, but we didn't mind. It gave us a chance to talk about the Crane case without prying ears. It was raining that night. Not a downpour, just a constant drizzle that made everything damp and miserable. We were patrolling the old industrial district, mostly abandoned buildings and empty lots. The kind of place where you'd find homeless people seeking shelter or kids looking for somewhere to get high. Around 11:30, we spotted something strange, lights in one of the warehouses that had been empty for years. Nothing obvious, just a faint glow from some of the windows. We called it in, did our check-in with dispatch, and decided to take a look. I still remember Parker's face when he turned to me after parking the car. "Something doesn't feel right about this, Pete," he said. I brushed him off. 19 years on the force makes you overconfident. We approached carefully, guns drawn but not raised. Standard procedure. The warehouse doors were chained, but a side door was slightly ajar. The rain had picked up and water was pooling around our feet as we entered. The inside was mostly dark, except for a dim light coming from somewhere deep in the building. The place smelled like mold and something else I couldn't place, something metallic and wrong. Our footsteps echoed as we moved, between stacks of old crates and rusted machinery. "Detroit PD," I called out. "Anyone here?" No response, but I swear I heard movement further inside. Parker pointed to the left, indicating he'd circle around while I went straight. I nodded, and we separated. That was my first mistake. I moved deeper into the warehouse, sweeping my flashlight across empty spaces. The light we'd seen from outside seemed to be coming from around a corner ahead. As I approached, the air felt different, heavier somehow, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. My radio crackled with static, then went silent. When I rounded the corner, I found nothing but an empty room with a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. No people, no signs of recent occupation. Just as I was about to call for Parker, I heard him shout from somewhere in the building. I ran toward his voice, gun ready, heart pounding. The warehouse seemed to shift around me, corridors appearing where I was sure none had been before. I found myself in sections of the building that couldn't possibly exist based on the exterior size. "Parker!" I shouted. No response. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, but the beam of my flashlight illuminated only empty space. The footsteps continued, seeming to come from all directions at once. I backed against a wall, trying to cover all angles. My radio burst to life with Parker's voice, distorted and panicked. "Thompson, they found us. Get back to the car. Now." I ran. The warehouse had become a maze, but somehow I found my way back to the entrance. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The air was completely still. Our squad car sat where we'd left it, but something was wrong with the way it looked, like it was slightly out of focus or too sharp at the edges. Parker was already there, standing by the hood, but he wasn't alone. 3 figures stood with him. I couldn't make out their features clearly. They seemed to shift and blur when I tried to focus on them. They were tall, dressed in what looked like suits, but something about their proportions was just wrong. "Parker?" I called out, approaching slowly. He turned to me, his face drained of color. "They know about the case," he said, his voice oddly flat. "They know what we found." "What are you talking about?" I asked, eyeing the figures. "Who are these people?" Parker didn't answer. One of the figures placed a hand on his shoulder, and he visibly flinched. "We need to come with them," Parker said mechanically. "They need to show us something." "Like hell we do," I replied, reaching for my weapon. My gun wasn't there. I looked down in confusion, then back up to see my service weapon on the hood of our car, along with my badge. Parker's were there too, neatly arranged. One of the figures stepped forward. I still couldn't make out a face, but I felt its gaze on me, cold and assessing. When it spoke, the voice seemed to bypass my ears entirely and form directly in my mind. "You've been looking into matters beyond your jurisdiction, Detective Thompson." I felt dizzy, like the ground was tilting beneath me. "Who are you? FBI? Internal Affairs?" A sound like laughter, but wrong somehow, like broken glass grinding together. Nothing so limited. Parker was still standing there, unnaturally still. I called out to him again, but he didn't react. It was like he was in some kind of trance. "Your colleague has accepted our invitation," the figure said. "You should do the same." "I'm not going anywhere with you," I said, trying to sound authoritative despite the fear climbing up my throat. "You already have." I looked around and realized we weren't in the warehouse district anymore. We were somewhere else entirely. A stretch of empty road I didn't recognize, with strange rock formations jutting up against a sky that was the wrong color. Our squad car was still there, but everything else had changed. I turned back to Parker, who finally met my eyes. There was recognition there and fear. So much fear. "Run," he mouthed silently. I did. I sprinted away from them, from the car, from Parker. I heard nothing behind me. No footsteps, no shouts, nothing. Just the sound of my own ragged breathing and pounding heart. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs gave out. When I finally stopped and looked back, I was alone on that strange road. No sign of Parker, the figures, or our car. Just emptiness stretching in all directions. I walked for what felt like hours. The landscape never changed, and the light never shifted. It was like being trapped in a photograph. Eventually, I came to what looked like our squad car parked on the side of the road. Approaching cautiously, I saw it was indeed our vehicle. Same number, same dent on the passenger door from where Parker had backed into a fire hydrant last year. I opened the door and found the interior exactly as we'd left it, except for one thing, a note on the driver's seat in my own handwriting. "They found us." I had no memory of writing it. The car started on the first try. The GPS showed we were 50 miles from where we'd been, though the odometer only showed 18 miles more than when we'd parked at the warehouse. I tried the radio, but got only static. I drove, following the road, hoping to find a way back to Detroit, back to something familiar. After some time, I can't say how long because my watch had stopped, I saw lights ahead. As I got closer, I recognized the Detroit skyline. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As I entered the city limits, everything seemed subtly wrong. Buildings were where they should be, but their proportions were off. People walked the streets, but their movements were too smooth, too coordinated. I drove to the precinct on autopilot. When I arrived, I just sat in the car, unable to make myself get out, because I knew somehow that this wasn't my Detroit. This wasn't my home. Finally, I gathered my courage and reached for the door handle. Before I could open it, there was a tap on the window. I looked up to see one of the figures from before, still featureless, still wrong. "Some doors should remain closed, Detective," it said without speaking. "You chose to open one. Now you must live with the consequences." I blinked, and suddenly I was back in the industrial lot, sitting in our squad car alone. Parker's and my weapons and badges were arranged on the hood. Blood, my blood, dripped from my nose onto my shirt. I stumbled out of the car and called for Parker, but he was gone. I tried my radio, but it was dead. When I finally got back to the precinct and reported what had happened, they thought I was crazy or drunk or both. They found no evidence of Parker anywhere. The GPS data from our car showed we'd driven in a perfect circle around the city before stopping at that lot. The blood on the ground by the car was mine, but the trail just stopped abruptly, as if I'd vanished mid-step. They found a substance on the car seats they couldn't identify, something with a molecular structure that made no sense to the lab techs. When they tried to analyze it again the next day, the samples had vanished. 3 months later, Parker's disassembled service revolver showed up at the precinct in a plain package addressed to me. With it was a note: "Some doors should remain closed." I recognized the handwriting as my own, though I have no memory of writing it. I was forced into psychiatric leave, then early retirement. The crane case was closed by order of people way above my pay grade. Sometimes I drive by that warehouse, but it's never the same one I remember entering that night. 5 years after it happened, I got a call from a construction worker who'd found a sealed container at a demolition site. Inside were Parker's wallet, his wedding ring, and letters dated from 2017 that accurately described crimes that hadn't happened yet. I still hear Parker sometimes, coming through on random radio frequencies, always. The same message: "Thompson, they found us. Get back to the car. Now." I don't know what happened that night. I don't know where Parker is. But I know we found something we weren't supposed to find, and it found us right back. If you're a cop and you catch a case that powerful people want buried, let it go. Some doors should remain closed. I learned that the hard way. Story 15. I work as a sales rep for a medical supply company, which means lots of driving between hospitals and clinics across 3 states. Last Tuesday was particularly brutal. 12 hours on the road after a morning presentation that went sideways when my laptop crashed mid-demo. By 10 at night, I was fighting to keep my eyes open on Interstate 95, still 2 hours from home. My gas light had been on for about 20 miles when I spotted a sign for Shadowvale Rest Stop, 1 mile. I'd never noticed this rest area before, which was weird because I've driven this stretch of I-95 hundreds of times. The exit appeared suddenly around a bend, and I swerved onto it, nearly missing the turn. The place looked abandoned. The parking lot was cracked with weeds growing through, and the lights were dim, flickering in a way that made my skin crawl. Only one streetlight was working properly, casting this sickly yellow glow over the empty lot. But my car's fuel gauge was practically buried below E, and my bladder was about to burst, so I didn't have much choice. I pulled up close to the main building, a squat concrete structure with faded lettering. The windows were grimy, but I could see a light on inside. I figured maybe there was an overnight attendant or something. The moment I stepped out of my car, I felt wrong. You know that feeling when you're completely alone but somehow feel watched? It was dead silent, except for the buzzing of that one flickering light overhead and the occasional distant whoosh of a semi passing on the highway. The air felt heavy, like right before a thunderstorm, but the sky was clear. I walked to the entrance, and the automatic doors groaned open reluctantly, like they hadn't been used in ages. The inside smelled musty, that distinct mix of old cleaning chemicals and dampness. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed and flickered, some of them completely dead, leaving patches of darkness between pools of harsh white light. There was nobody at the information desk. No vending machines hummed, just empty space where they should have been, with rectangular clean spots on the dirty floor showing where they'd once stood. The whole place looked like it had been hastily abandoned. I really needed to pee, so I followed the signs to the restrooms. As I walked down the corridor, I swear I heard something. Not footsteps exactly, but a soft sound, like someone whispering. I stopped, holding my breath to listen. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding way too loud in the empty building. No response, but the whispering seemed to get more intense, still too quiet to make out words, but definitely there. I'm not usually jumpy, but something about this place had me on edge. I rushed to the bathroom, did my business as quickly as possible, and almost ran back to the main area. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before. In the shadowy corner of the main lobby, partially hidden behind what used to be the information desk, was a door. Not like the other doors in the building. This one was older, made of dark wood with a tarnished brass handle. It looked completely out of place in the concrete and linoleum rest stop. The whispering seemed to be coming from behind it. Common sense told me to just leave, get back in my car, and coast to the next gas station if I had to. But then I heard what sounded like a woman's voice, clearer than the whispers, saying what sounded like, "Help me." I stood frozen for a minute, debating what to do. It could be someone hurt or trapped, or it could be nothing, my tired brain playing tricks on me. But that voice sounded so real, so desperate. I approached the door slowly. "Is someone there? Do you need help?" I called out. The whispers stopped. Then, faintly, "Please, help me." I reached for the handle, half expecting it to be locked, but it turned easily. The door opened to reveal a staircase leading down, lit by a single bare bulb that cast more shadows than light. Everything in me screamed to turn around. This wasn't right. Hidden staircases in abandoned rest stops. This was horror movie territory. But that voice had sounded so human, so frightened. "Hello," I called down the stairs. "I'm going to call 911 if you're hurt." "Please don't leave me," the voice replied, clearer now. "I've been down here so long." I took out my phone to call for help, but there was no signal, not even one bar. I put my phone flashlight on and started down the stairs, taking each step carefully. The staircase spiraled down farther than seemed possible for a roadside rest stop. The air got colder and damper as I descended. At the bottom was a narrow hallway with pipes running along the ceiling. Some kind of maintenance area, I guessed. The whispers were all around me now, like dozens of people having hushed conversations just out of earshot. I followed the sound of the woman's voice, which led me to another door. This one was metal, like a service entrance, with peeling grey paint. When I opened it, I nearly screamed. Sitting on an overturned bucket in what looked like an old boiler room was a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 25. Her clothes were filthy and outdated. A denim jacket that looked straight out of the 90s over a faded floral dress. Her dark hair was matted, and her face was pale and gaunt, like she hadn't seen sunlight in years. She looked up at me with wide eyes. "You came," she whispered. "You actually came." "Who are you?" I asked, staying by the door, ready to run. "What are you doing down here?" "My name is Sarah," she said. Her voice was hoarse, like she wasn't used to speaking at full volume. "I've been trapped here for I don't even know how long anymore." Trapped? How? Why didn't you just leave? I asked, my hand still on the doorknob. She gave me this haunted look that made my blood run cold. They won't let me. Who won't let you? Sarah stood up slowly, like her joints were stiff. The others, the ones who whisper, the ones who've been here longer than me. She stepped closer and I noticed her movements were jerky, unnatural. This place, it's not just a rest stop, it's like a trap. People stop here and sometimes they don't leave. Or at least, not all of them leaves. I backed up a step. That doesn't make any sense. I'm calling the police as soon as I get a signal. You need help. You don't understand, she said urgently. My family and I stopped here years ago. I think it was 2007. We were on our way to Florida. I came in to use the bathroom while my parents filled up the car. I found that door just like you did, heard voices just like you did. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. When I finally made it back upstairs, hours had passed. My family was gone. The rest stop was different, abandoned, just like you see it now. A cold feeling spread through my chest. That's impossible. If this place has been abandoned since 2007, why is it still on the highway maps? Why are there still signs for it? Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. It appears when it needs to, when it's hungry. The whispers around us grew louder, and I swear I could almost make out words now. We need to get out of here, I said. Now. Sarah nodded vigorously. Yes, please, take me with you. I've tried to leave so many times, but they always pull me back. But maybe with you. Her eyes were desperate, pleading. I didn't fully believe her story. It was too bizarre. But something was definitely wrong with this place, and this poor woman clearly needed help, whether she was telling the truth or suffering from some delusion. Okay, let's go. Stay close to me, I said, turning back toward the door. That's when I saw them. In the shadows of the hallway outside, shapes, human-like but wrong somehow, darker than the darkness around them. Where their faces should have been were just swirling, twisted features, like they were constantly melting and reforming. One of them stepped forward, and I could see through it partially, like it was made of dense smoke. It reached out a hand toward us. Sarah screamed, They know you're trying to help me." I slammed the door shut, but there was no lock. "Is there another way out?" Sarah pointed to a maintenance ladder in the corner that led up to what looked like a hatch in the ceiling. "That goes up to the old storage room. From there we can get to the main building." We raced to the ladder. I went up first, pushing open the heavy hatch. As I climbed through, I reached back to help Sarah up. Her hand was ice cold when I grabbed it. The storage room was pitch black except for the beam from my phone flashlight. Shelves lined the walls, holding ancient-looking cleaning supplies and maintenance equipment covered in thick dust. "This way," Sarah whispered, leading me to another door. As we moved through the darkness, the whispers followed us, growing louder, more insistent. I kept seeing movement from the corner of my eye, those shadow figures circling us. We hurried through the storage room door into a back hallway of the main building. We were close now. I could see the main lobby up ahead, but between us and the exit, the air seemed to thicken and darken like smoke gathering. The shadow figures materialized more clearly now, maybe 7 or 8 of them. Some looked like they were wearing clothes from different decades. I swear one had on what looked like a 70s-style leisure suit, another a poodle skirt like from the 50s. "They're lost travelers," Sarah whispered frantically. "People who stopped here over the years. They need someone to take their place so they can move on." One of the figures spoke, its voice like gravel. "Stay with us, Sarah. You belong here now." Another turned toward me, its face a swirling void. "Or we'll take the new one." Sarah grabbed my arm. "Run!" We bolted for the exit, the shadow figures gliding after us with unnatural speed. The air turned freezing cold, and my lungs burned with each breath. The lights overhead exploded one by one as we passed under them, showering us with sparks and glass. I could feel cold hands grabbing at my clothes, my hair. The whispers became screams, filling my head until I could barely think. We burst through the lobby, the automatic doors opening too slowly. I shoved them the rest of the way, practically dragging Sarah behind me. The moment we crossed the threshold outside, the shadow figures stopped at the doorway, unable or unwilling to follow us into the open air. They pressed against some invisible barrier, their features contorting in rage. We ran to my car. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. The engine sputtered once, twice, then roared to life. I slammed it into reverse, tires squealing as I backed away. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I looked in my rearview mirror. The shadow figures had come outside now, standing at the edge of the property line, watching us drive away. And then, impossibly, the entire rest stop seemed to flicker, like a bad TV signal. I floored it back to the interstate, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Sarah sat beside me, huddled against the passenger door, staring out the window with wide eyes. "Are you okay?" I asked her, though it was a stupid question. Of course she wasn't okay. She turned to me slowly. "I think so. I haven't been this far away in so long." She looked down at her hands in wonder. "I can feel myself again." We drove in silence for a while. My gas gauge miraculously showed a quarter tank now, though it had been empty before. After about 20 minutes, we passed a sign for the next actual rest area. I pulled in, parking under the brightest light I could find. The place was normal. A few cars parked outside, vending machines humming inside, fluorescent lights, steady and bright. I turned to Sarah. "We should call the police, report what happened. Maybe your family—" I stopped mid-sentence. Sarah was crying, but smiling too. "They're gone," she whispered. "My family searched for months, but that was 15 years ago. They probably think I'm dead." "We'll find them," I insisted. "With social media and everything nowadays, we can—" "Thank you," she interrupted, "for getting me out, for believing me." I reached out to touch her hand reassuringly, but my fingers passed right through hers. I jerked back, gasping. Sarah looked down at herself. Her body was becoming transparent, fading at the edges like a photograph left in the sun too long. "Sarah?" My voice came out as a terrified squeak. She held up her increasingly translucent hands, studying them with a mixture of fear and wonder. I think I'm free now. Really free." Before I could respond, she faded completely, leaving nothing behind. No trace that she'd ever been there at all. I sat frozen in my car for what felt like hours, trying to process what had happened. Eventually, I drove home in a daze. I've spent the last 3 days researching. I found newspaper articles from 2007 about a girl named Sarah Colton who disappeared at a rest stop on I-95. The rest stop was demolished the following year after multiple reports of unexplained phenomena and unsafe structural issues. But I was just there. I saw it with my own eyes. I drive that stretch of highway again tomorrow for work. I've mapped out alternate routes, but I'm terrified I'll somehow end up at that exit again. The Shadow Vale rest stop that shouldn't exist. Because sometimes when it's quiet, I can still hear the whispers. Story 16. I still can't sleep properly after what happened at Aspen Shore Lodge last summer. I've been lurking on this forum for months, reading other people's experiences, trying to make sense of mine. I guess it's finally time to share my story. My name's Alex. I'm a photographer specializing in architecture and interior design for real estate and vacation rentals. Last July, I got hired to shoot Aspen Shore Lodge in northern Michigan for their website update. The owner, Elaine Barrett, seemed nice enough over the phone, professional, a bit reserved. She mentioned her father had built the place in the 70s, and she'd converted it to a vacation rental after inheriting it. The drive up was beautiful, all those Michigan forests and glimpses of Lake Manitou sparkling through the trees. The lodge itself was this gorgeous 2-story cedar building nestled right on the lakeshore. It looked exactly like what you'd expect from an upscale cabin rental, rustic charm with modern amenities. I arrived around 2 in the afternoon. Elaine met me in the driveway, mid-50s, well-dressed, with this nervous energy about her. She kept checking her watch while giving me a tour, explaining she had to leave for a meeting in Traverse City but would be back the next morning. "You'll have the whole place to yourself tonight," she said. "Just be sure to get shots of every room. The library is particularly popular with guests." Something in her tone made me uneasy, but I brushed it off. Getting to stay alone in a luxury lodge on a lake seemed like a perk of the job. The place was stunning. Vaulted ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, a massive stone fireplace in the great room. I started working methodically, room by room, setting up, lighting, capturing different angles. By early evening, I'd photographed most of the first floor except for the library. That library was something else. Dark wood paneling, built-in bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, a large antique desk, and this beautiful Persian rug covering most of the hardwood floor. The light was fading, so I set up my equipment quickly. While adjusting my tripod, I heard a floorboard creak behind me. I turned, expecting to see Elaine had returned early, but no one was there. Just as I was about to turn back to my camera, I caught movement from the corner of my eye, a shadow passing across the doorway. "Hello?" I called out. Nothing. I told myself it was just an old house settling. I finished shooting the library and decided to break for dinner. I'd brought sandwiches and was eating at the kitchen island when the lights flickered. Once, twice, then steady again. Michigan backwoods, old wiring. Made sense, right? After dinner, I headed upstairs to photograph the bedrooms. In the master bedroom, I noticed something odd. The bed looked slightly rumpled, as if someone had been sitting on it. I was certain it had been perfectly made when Elaine showed me around earlier. I smoothed it out before taking the shots. In the bathroom, while changing lenses, I heard what sounded like footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, deliberate steps. "Elaine!" I called out. No answer. I stepped into the hallway. Empty. The footsteps had stopped. I walked to the staircase and looked down. Nothing. Back to work. I told myself I was just tired, hearing things. By 9 o'clock, I'd finished everything except exterior night shots. I went outside with my tripod, setting up different angles of the lodge with the moonlight reflecting off the lake behind it. The night was still, eerily quiet except for distant loon calls echoing across the water. As I was focusing my camera, I glimpsed a light moving inside the house, upstairs, going from room to room, like someone carrying a flashlight. But I'd left all the lights on. I packed up quickly and went back inside, heart pounding. The upstairs hallway was empty, all rooms just as I'd left them, but one bedroom door was closed. I was certain I'd left them all open after photographing them. I hesitated before turning the knob. The room was dark. I fumbled for the light switch, flicked it on. Empty. But the bedspread was wrinkled again, and this time there was a distinct depression, as if someone had been lying there moments before. I decided to finish work in the morning. I texted Elaine saying I'd complete the shoot when she returned. Then I picked the downstairs guest bedroom to sleep in. Somehow the idea of sleeping upstairs didn't appeal anymore. I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every sound of the house settling made me tense up. Around midnight, I heard what sounded like a drawer opening and closing in the library. Then footsteps. I lay frozen, listening. The footsteps moved from the library through the great room, then stopped right outside my bedroom door. I held my breath. The doorknob turned slowly. The door opened just a crack. Through it, I could see nothing but darkness in the hallway beyond, which was wrong because I'd left the hall light on. "Who's there?" I managed to call out, my voice cracking. The door stopped moving. Then, slowly, it closed again. I lay there, heart hammering for what felt like hours. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. I dreamed of water, dark, cold water closing over my head, sinking deeper and deeper into Lake Manitou. In the dream, I wasn't alone. Shadowy figures sank alongside me, their faces contorted in silent screams, and below us something waited, something ancient and patient. I woke with a start at 3 a.m, gasping for breath, my clothes soaked with sweat. The room was freezing cold. I could see my breath forming clouds in the air. A scratching sound was coming from somewhere in the house. Soft at first, then louder. Scratch, 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 like a pen on paper. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and gathered my courage to investigate. The scratching was coming from the library. Standing outside the library door, I hesitated. The scratching had stopped. I pushed the door open slowly. The room was bathed in moonlight streaming through the windows. At first glance, it appeared empty. Then I noticed the desk. A book lay open on it, a leather-bound volume I hadn't seen during my shoot. Beside it, a fountain pen. As I watched, horrified, the pen rose an inch off the desk. It hovered there for a moment, then moved across the page, making scratching sounds as it wrote, by itself, with no hand holding it. I backed away, bumping into a bookshelf. The pen dropped. The temperature in the room plummeted further. In the corner of the library, the air seemed to shimmer and condense. A figure began to take shape. An elderly man in old-fashioned clothes. He wasn't quite solid. I could see the bookshelf through him, but he was unmistakably there. He looked at me with hollow eyes and spoke in a raspy whisper. "Have you signed the register yet? Everyone who stays at Manitou Lodge must sign." I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The apparition drifted toward me, pointing at the book. "Sign it," he insisted. "Become part of the lake forever." I ran. Out of the library, through the great room, fumbling with the front door lock. Behind me, lights began switching on and off. Doors opened and slammed shut. The temperature dropped so low I could see frost forming on the windows. Once outside, I didn't stop running until I reached my car. My hand shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I backed out of the driveway, I looked up at the lodge one last time. Every light was on, and in every window stood a figure. Men and women in clothing from different eras, all staring down at me with the same hollow eyes as the old man. I drove, straight through the night, not stopping until I was 3 hours away. When I called Elaine the next morning to explain why I'd left, she didn't seem surprised. She apologized in this rehearsed way and asked if I could send the photos I'd already taken. I did, but I deleted the ones showing the library. 2 weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I researched Aspenshaw Lodge online and discovered it had previously been called Manitou Lodge. Digging deeper, I found newspaper archives mentioning a tragic accident in 1932. A wedding party of 11 guests had drowned during a late-night boat excursion on Lake Manitou. The original lodge owner, William Blackwood, had been suspected of involvement but never charged. He'd received a substantial insurance payout after the accident, right when the lodge was facing bankruptcy. I kept searching and found a local history blog mentioning rumors about Blackwood. Apparently, he had a tradition of making guests sign a special register upon arrival, telling them that adding their name meant becoming part of Lake Manitou forever. Last month, I received an email from a Dr. Edward Fleming, a historical researcher investigating Aspenshaw Lodge. He'd gotten my name from Elaine. He asked if I'd experienced anything unusual during my stay. I told him everything. He wrote back with information that still makes my skin crawl. The lodge had been demolished earlier this year after multiple documented supernatural events. During demolition, workers found human remains beneath the foundation, identified as William Blackwood himself, who was supposed to have died in Chicago in 1951. The remains showed signs of some kind of preservation process, with both hands clutching torn pages from a guest register. Dr. Fleming also mentioned they'd found a concealed space under the library floor containing the original guest register. It had entries from the drowned wedding party, followed by signatures of guests who had stayed at the modern lodge, including some who had gone missing over the years. I asked if my name was in it. He hasn't responded. I still have the photos I took that day, including ones I never shared with Elaine. In the background of one library shot, partially hidden by my lighting equipment, there's a dark stain on the floor, right where they later found the hidden compartment with the register. And in another photo, barely visible in the reflection of a bedroom mirror, stands a figure that wasn't there when I took the picture. I can't sleep near water anymore. Even showering triggers panic attacks. And some nights, I wake up choking, feeling like I'm drowning. On those nights, my sheets are always soaking wet, smelling faintly of lake water. I don't know what would have happened if I'd signed that register, but sometimes, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I hear that scratchy voice again. Become part of the lake forever. Story 17. I've been trying to write this down for months, but every time I start, my hands begin to shake so badly I can barely type. I need to tell someone what happened because I'm terrified it's spreading and nobody is watching for the signs. I'm a wildlife biologist specializing in migration patterns of North American mammals. Last November, I was tracking some deeply concerning anomalies in the Idaho Panhandle. Multiple species, deer, elk, black bears, foxes, even small rodents, were all abandoning their territories and moving in the same direction. This wasn't normal seasonal migration. Predator and prey were traveling the same routes without interaction. GPS collars showed some animals walking over 50 miles, all converging toward the same valley. My department head thought it might be related to the wildfires from the previous summer, but the data didn't support that. The movements were too coordinated, too purposeful, so I took my equipment and headed into the mountains alone. In retrospect, I should have brought a team, but funding cuts meant it was just me and my 10-year-old Subaru loaded with research gear. The weather forecast hadn't mentioned snow, but by afternoon, fat flakes were falling so heavily I could barely see the logging road. My GPS kept glitching, showing me in places that made no sense. I decided to turn back, but as I rounded a bend, a deer darted across the road. I swerved to avoid it and slid into a ditch. The car was stuck, and cell service was non-existent. With night falling and the temperature dropping, I grabbed my emergency pack and followed what looked like a trail through the trees. After about a mile of trudging through deepening snow, I saw lights through the trees. I emerged into a small town that wasn't on any of my maps. A wooden sign half covered in snow read, "Stillwater." Main Street had a handful of businesses, a general store, what looked like a post office, and a diner with its closed sign visible. The buildings looked oddly timeless, neither modern nor exactly historical. No cell towers, no satellite dishes, no power lines. I approached the nearest house, a two-story craftsman with warm light spilling from the windows. An older man answered my knock. He looked to be in his 70s, but moved with the ease of someone decades younger. He had a full head of silver hair and unusually bright eyes. "Car trouble?" he asked before I could speak. He didn't seem at all surprised to see a stranger on his doorstep in a snowstorm. I explained my situation, and he introduced himself as Bennett Larson, inviting me in without hesitation. His home was warm and comfortable, but oddly sparse. No TV, no computer, no phone that I could see. The walls were decorated with intricate hand-drawn maps of the surrounding wilderness and shelves filled with leather-bound journals. "We don't get many visitors in Stillwater," he said, hanging my wet coat by the fire, "especially not in November." When I asked about the town not being on my maps, he just smiled. "We prefer it that way. Been here since 1891, started as an ecological experiment of sorts." He offered me dinner, a hearty venison stew that tasted unusual but delicious, and told me I could stay the night. The storm was getting worse, and he said the roads wouldn't be passable until morning anyway. I asked about a tow truck, and he assured me that someone named Marcus could help in the morning. As we talked, I noticed peculiarities about Bennett. Despite his age, his movements were fluid and precise. His hearing seemed extraordinarily acute. He responded to sounds I could barely detect, and his eyes. There was something about his eyes that made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't pinpoint why. He showed me to a guest room upstairs, but I was too wired to sleep. Looking out the window, I noticed movement in the street below. Despite the heavy snow and late hour, people were walking purposefully through town. More disturbing were the animals, deer picking their way between houses, foxes trotting down sidewalks, and even a black bear lumbering across a yard. All were heading in the same direction. I squinted through the falling snow and saw a large building at the end of the street. It looked like some kind of community center or town hall. People and animals alike were disappearing inside. A floorboard creaked behind me. I turned to find Bennett standing in the doorway. "Can't sleep?" His voice was soft, but his posture had changed. He seemed taller somehow, more alert. I felt like prey being assessed by a predator. "Just looking at the snow," I lied. He crossed to the window and pulled the shutters closed. "Best to get some rest. The storm makes people imagine strange things." He offered me tea, which I accepted to avoid seeming suspicious. It tasted bitter, and within minutes my limbs felt heavy. The last thing I remember was Bennett watching me from the doorway, his eyes reflecting the lamplight in a way that human eyes shouldn't. I woke up groggy and disoriented. Sunlight streamed through the open shutters, and my watch showed it was past 11 in the morning. My backpack had been moved from where I'd left it, and when I checked, my field journal was slightly out of place. Downstairs, instead of Bennett, I found a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun. She introduced herself as Mayor Diana Huxley. "Bennett had business to attend to," she explained, setting a plate of eggs and toast before me. "He asked me to make sure you were taken care of." I thanked her and asked about getting my car towed. She assured me it was being handled. As we talked, I asked about what I'd seen the previous night. Her smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened. "Ah, Bennett mentioned you might have seen our monthly wildlife census. Stillwater has an innovative management program. We attract regional fauna for population counts and health assessments." At night, in a snowstorm, I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. The weather actually helps. Animals are less skittish in poor visibility. Her explanation made no scientific sense, but she continued before I could challenge her. "We've maintained ecological balance here for generations. It's why we prefer to remain undocumented." Throughout the day, I noticed more oddities. Every resident watched me with the same unnerving intensity. All the houses had identical lunar calendars prominently displayed. The town had no children or teenagers, and no one who appeared over 80. Mayor Huxley gave me a tour, explaining that Stillwater was founded by ecological pioneers seeking harmony with nature. The town maintained deliberate isolation to preserve their way of life. When I asked about the lack of modern telecommunications, she simply said they found such technology disruptive to natural rhythms. What struck me most was the residents' unusual vitality. Elderly people moved with the strength and coordination of much younger individuals. Their sensory awareness seemed heightened. They reacted to sounds and movements I could barely perceive. By late afternoon, I was shown to the general store to pick up supplies for my journey home. The shopkeeper, a wiry man named Harold, informed me that Marcus had recovered my car and would drive me back at dawn tomorrow. When I asked to leave immediately, he insisted the roads were still being cleared. I felt trapped and increasingly uneasy. The town's explanations weren't adding up, and no one would let me use a phone or radio to contact my department. I pretended to accept their hospitality while looking for an opportunity to investigate further. After dinner at Mayor Huxley's home, she showed me to a guest room suggesting an early night. I waited until the house grew quiet, then slipped out around 10:30. The night was clear and cold, with a full moon illuminating the snow-covered streets. I made my way toward the community building I'd seen the previous night. As I hid in the shadows between houses, I again witnessed residents emerging from their homes. They all wore identical gray garments and moved with the same deliberate gait. More disturbing was the wildlife. Just like the night before, animals entered the town from all directions: deer, elk, foxes, wolves, bears, moving alongside the humans without fear or aggression. The procession was silent except for the soft crunch of snow under feet and paws. I followed at a distance, ducking between buildings. The community center was a large circular structure with a domed roof. Its architecture was unlike anything else in town, almost organic in appearance. No windows were visible from my position, just a single set of double doors where people and animals entered. I waited until the street was empty, then approached a side entrance I'd spotted during my earlier reconnaissance. The door was unlocked. Inside, a narrow corridor led deeper into the building. The walls had a strange texture, not quite stone or wood, but something in between that seemed to absorb sound. The air was warm and humid with an unfamiliar musky scent. Following the corridor, I began to hear a low, pulsing sound like a massive heartbeat. The hallway opened into a vast, circular chamber that still haunts my nightmares. The walls were lined with translucent, membrane-like structures that pulsed with fluid. People and animals lay in concentric circles on the floor, all in trance-like states. Most horrifying were the fibrous tendrils extending from the walls and ceiling, connecting to the bodies by penetrating skin and fur. The humans displayed subtle anatomical alterations, elongated fingers, changes in teeth, patches of fine fur along their limbs. The animals showed corresponding adaptations, altered limb structures, facial features reorganized in disturbingly human-like patterns. At the chamber's center stood an enormous cylindrical tank filled with luminescent fluid. Inside floated what looked like a massive neural structure, hundreds of smaller brain-like organs connected in a complex network. Some appeared human, some animal, and many represented impossible hybrid forms. I must have gasped or made some noise because several heads turned in my direction. Mayor Huxley rose from her position, tendrils detaching from her skin with wet, sucking sounds. Others followed, moving with predatory coordination. They didn't speak but communicated through vocalizations incorporating animal intonations, growls and chirps mixed with words. Huxley approached me, her movements fluid but wrong, like multiple creatures operating one body. "You shouldn't be here, Dr. Chen," she said, her voice overlaid with a chittering sound. "Not yet. You weren't prepared." "What is this?" I backed toward the exit, but others were already blocking it. "Evolution," she replied. "Directed, accelerated evolution. Our founders discovered something in these mountains, a meteorite with biological technology beyond human understanding. It showed us how to combine our genetics with the wisdom of other species." As she spoke, I noticed her fingers were slightly too long, the joints too flexible. Her teeth, when she smiled, included unusual canines. Each generation becomes more diverse in composition while maintaining human cognitive frameworks, she continued. The eldest eventually transitioned completely into the neural collective, sharing their lifetime of experiences. Bennett emerged from the crowd, his appearance more altered than I'd noticed before, his ears slightly pointed, his movements reminiscent of a wolf. "This is why we live so long, why we're so healthy," he said. "We share the strengths of multiple species, and now you'll join us." They surrounded me, and I felt something wet and sinuous touch the back of my neck. Pain shot down my spine as a tendril attempted to penetrate my skin. In desperation, I grabbed a metal implement from a nearby table and swung it at the nearest membrane wall. The structure ruptured, spraying fluid that caused immediate convulsions in anyone it touched. The neural network in the central tank pulsed rapidly, and all the connected residents began to seize simultaneously. I used the distraction to flee, running blindly through hallways as inhuman screams echoed behind me. I found my way outside and ran through the snow toward the forest. Behind me, the community center's dome pulsed with light. Animals streamed from the building, not just those that had entered earlier, but grotesque hybrid forms that moved in unnatural ways. I reached my car, which had indeed been recovered and parked at the town's edge. The keys were in the ignition. As I sped away, my rearview mirror showed the town of Stillwater, illuminated by flashes of blue-green light. 3 days later, I led a joint task force of federal agents back to the coordinates where Stillwater should have been. We found the town largely abandoned, with evidence of advanced biotechnology and partial remains of transformed individuals. The community center had collapsed, leaving only a cavernous pit filled with decaying organic material. I've been examined by countless doctors since then. They've found subtle changes in my nervous system, though I show no external signs of transformation. Sometimes I feel sensations that aren't my own. Hunger when I've just eaten, the urge to run when I'm sitting still. The official report classified Stillwater as a cult practicing extreme body modification and illegal wildlife management. But I know the truth. The neural symbiote wasn't just facilitating genetic exchange. It was gradually assuming control of the hybrid population for its own evolutionary agenda. My greatest fear is that it isn't over. Fragments of the collective escaped. I have dreams, or perhaps memories not my own, of spores and seeds dispersing into the wilderness. Watch for unusual animal behaviors, coordinated movements, interspecies cooperation, attraction to human settlements. The migration hasn't ended, it's expanding. Story 18. I still can't make sense of what happened 3 nights ago. I've been sitting in this motel room since then, barely sleeping, trying to process everything. Maybe writing it all down will help, though I doubt anyone will believe me. I barely believe it myself. I was driving cross-country from California back to Oklahoma for my mom's 70th birthday. My wife couldn't get the time off work, so I was making the trip alone. I'd done the drive before, but never at night. The plan was to reach Albuquerque by morning, crash for a few hours, then finish the drive the next day. It was just after 2 in the morning when things got weird. I was on Interstate 40, somewhere in the New Mexico desert between Gallup and Albuquerque. There was barely any traffic, just the occasional semi passing by. The radio had turned to static about an hour back, so I was alone with my thoughts, fighting to stay awake. The dashboard clock read 2:17 when I first saw him. At first, I thought it was just some roadside debris or maybe a coyote, but as my headlights swept across the figure, I could clearly see it was a person standing on the shoulder with their thumb out. A hitchhiker in the middle of nowhere at 2 in the morning. Immediate red flags. I'm not the type to pick up hitchhikers. Never have been. My dad always warned me about it, and those warnings only intensified after what happened to Daniel back in college. But as I drove past, something made me glance in my rearview mirror, and that's when my heart nearly stopped. Even in the dim red glow of my taillights, I recognized him immediately. The shaggy brown hair, the lanky frame, that army surplus jacket he always wore. It was impossible, but I knew exactly who it was. Daniel Keene. My college roommate, my best friend for 4 years at Oklahoma State, the same Daniel Keene who died in a car accident 25 years ago. I slammed on the brakes so hard the tires screeched. My hands were shaking as I pulled onto the shoulder about 50 yards ahead of him. This wasn't possible. I must be hallucinating from fatigue. But I watched in my side mirror as the figure jogged up to my car. For a moment I considered flooring it. This couldn't be real. I was either dreaming or losing my mind, but curiosity won out. I lowered my passenger window just a crack as he approached. "Mike, thank God you stopped. I wasn't sure you would." That voice, exactly as I remembered it, and he looked exactly the same as the last time I saw him, 22 years old, not a day older. He was wearing the same clothes I remembered from college. Faded jeans, beat-up Converse, and that army jacket covered in patches. "This isn't real," I mumbled, more to myself than to him. "I know this is freaking you out, but we need to get moving. Now." His voice had an urgency I'd never heard before. "Please, Mike, I'll explain everything, but we need to get away from this stretch of highway. Just drive." Against all logic, I unlocked the door. Daniel slid into the passenger seat, bringing with him the smell of dust and something else I couldn't identify, something almost like ozone. "Drive, Mike, please. About 5 miles up, take exit 26. It's important." I put the car in drive and pulled back onto the empty highway, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. A million questions raced through my mind, but I couldn't form words. Daniel was dead. I went to his funeral. I helped carry his casket. "You're trying to figure out if you're hallucinating," Daniel said quietly. "You're not. It's really me, Mike." "That's impossible," I finally managed to say. "You died 25 years ago. Car accident outside of Tulsa." Yeah, about that. Daniel sighed, running his hand through his hair, the same nervous gesture I remembered. The official story wasn't exactly accurate. What are you talking about? You wrapped your car around a tree, fell asleep at the wheel coming back from a concert. Daniel's face darkened. That's what they told everyone. The truth is messier. I wasn't coming back from a concert, I was coming back from Mexico. I glanced at him, confused. Mexico? What the hell were you doing in Mexico? Buying stimulants, pills, mostly. I was selling them on campus. This hit me like a punch to the gut. You were dealing drugs? You never told me. I kept it quiet, needed the money after my dad lost his job. He looked out the window at the dark desert. That night I was driving back with a new shipment. I was exhausted, trying to make it back for finals. I fell asleep all right, but it wasn't just my car and a tree. I could see exit 26 approaching. I signaled and moved into the right lane. There was another car, a family of 4 coming back from their grandparents' place in Oklahoma City. I crossed the center line. His voice cracked. They all died, Mike, all of them. 2 kids in the back seat. I felt sick. Jesus, Daniel, why wasn't this in the news? The cops found the drugs. My parents were devastated enough. They had connections, pulled some strings. The official story became simpler. Just me and a tree. I took the exit, which led to a smaller highway running parallel to the interstate. It was completely deserted. Keep going on this road, Daniel instructed. It'll add about 40 minutes to your drive, but it's worth it. Daniel, what the hell is going on? How are you here? Why do you still look 22? Why? I know, it's a lot. He shifted in his seat to face me. After I died, things were different than what people think. There's no pearly gates, no fire and brimstone. Just consequences, balance. I took 4 innocent lives because of my selfishness. That debt doesn't just disappear. What are you saying? You're a ghost? Not exactly, more like I exist in between, and I have a job now. He smiled faintly. Cosmic community service, I guess you could call it, balancing the scales. And what's that got to do with me? With tonight? Daniel's expression turned serious. I identify potential accidents, points where probability calculations show a high likelihood of fatalities, and when I can, I intervene. A chill ran down my spine. Are you saying, if you'd stayed on I-40, there was a 94% probability you would have died tonight, Mike? About 7 miles ahead of where I was standing, there's going to be a pile-up. A semi-driver is going to fall asleep at the wheel in about 20 minutes. He'll cross the median and hit oncoming traffic. Multiple fatalities. I felt the blood drain from my face. How could you possibly know that? Like I said, it's my job now. I can see probabilities, outcomes, but I can only interact with people I had connections to in life, or people affected by my actions. You're the first person from my old life I've been able to reach. We drove in silence for a few minutes as I processed this. The desert night was pitch black around us, the headlights cutting through darkness that seemed to stretch forever. So you're saying you... What? You saved my life tonight? Daniel nodded. That's the general idea. It's what I do now. Small amends for the lives I took. How many people have you saved? Not enough, he said quietly. Never enough. The rules are complicated. I can't just stop every accident. There are limitations, protocols. But when the system identifies someone connected to me who's in danger, I get dispatched. The system? Daniel smiled wryly. I probably shouldn't be telling you this much. Let's just say there's an order to things that I'm now part of. As we continued down the empty highway, Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. Here, I want you to have this. I took it with one hand, keeping the other on the wheel. What is it? Documentation. Details about the accident that's about to happen. Times, locations, victims. Keep it. You'll want proof later that this wasn't just a dream or hallucination. I set the journal on the center console, unable to open it while driving. How much longer do you stick around? Daniel looked at his watch, the same Timex I remembered him wearing in college. Not long. I've completed my task for tonight. You're safely off that stretch of highway. So you just disappear, go back to wherever you came from? Something like that. He smiled, but there was sadness behind it. It was good to see you, Mike. You look good. A little gray around the temples, but it suits you. 25 years will do that, I said, trying to joke but feeling a lump in my throat. You look exactly the same. Yeah, that's the weird part. Eternal youth, but not in the way anyone would want it. He looked out at the dark landscape. Tell me about your life. Are you happy? For the next 20 minutes, I told him about my life, my job as an architect, my wife Susan, our 2 kids in college now. It felt surreal, catching up with my dead roommate like we were at a class reunion. I should be going soon, Daniel said eventually. I've pushed the limits of my time allocation as it is. Will I ever see you again? He shook his head. Probably not. This was a special circumstance. I'm not supposed to reveal myself like this, but I missed you, man. And I wanted you to know that I'm okay. Different, but okay. The lump in my throat got bigger. I missed you too. We all did. Your parents. I know. His voice was soft. I've watched over them. They're at peace now. I hadn't known his parents had passed. Another shock in a night full of them. Pull over here, Daniel said suddenly. We were on a stretch of empty highway with nothing but desert around us. I complied, bringing the car to a stop on the shoulder. Remember that journal, he said, pointing to it. Check the news tomorrow. You'll understand then. He opened the door and stepped out into the night. I wanted to stop him, to ask 100 more questions, but something told me our time was up. Take care of yourself, Mike, he said, leaning down to look at me one last time. Live well. That's the best thing you can do for me. And then he closed the door and walked into the darkness. I watched in the side mirror as his figure receded, and then, I swear this is true, he simply faded away, like mist dissipating in sunlight. I sat there for a long time, engine idling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Eventually, I put the car in drive and continued on. I made it to Albuquerque just as dawn was breaking. The first thing I did in my motel room was turn on the TV. It didn't take long to find the news. Breaking news this morning: a catastrophic multi-vehicle collision on Interstate 40, approximately 30 miles west of Albuquerque, has claimed at least 6 lives. Authorities report that a tractor-trailer crossed the median shortly before 3 a.m., striking several vehicles in the eastbound lanes. The accident happened exactly where Daniel said it would, exactly when he predicted. I felt sick thinking about how I would have been right in the middle of it if I hadn't detoured. With shaking hands, I opened the journal Daniel had given me. Inside were detailed notes about the accident, times, locations, even the name of the truck driver. Everything matched what was being reported on the news. I flipped through the pages, finding more information about other accidents, other interventions Daniel had made. But as I watched, the ink on the pages began to fade before my eyes, the words disappearing like they were being erased by an invisible hand. Within minutes, every page was blank except for the very last one. There, still perfectly clear, was a photo I hadn't seen in decades. Daniel and me outside our dorm freshman year, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning like idiots with our whole lives ahead of us. On the back, in Daniel's messy handwriting, some debts can never be fully repaid, but we try anyway. Live well, Mike. That was 3 days ago. I've barely slept since then. I've called in sick to work, told my wife I needed a few extra days on the road. I've been sitting in this motel room staring at that photo, trying to make sense of everything. I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened that night or what Daniel has become, but I know it was real. And I know that somehow, for reasons I'll never fully comprehend, my dead best friend reached across whatever divides life from death to save me. The highway stretches out ahead of me tomorrow, all the way back to Oklahoma. I don't know if I'll ever see Daniel again, but I'll be looking for him at every lonely stretch of road for the rest of my life.